Imagine a ship built long ago, made of strong wooden planks. Over the years, some of those planks rot or break. The crew replaces them one by one. After many years, none of the original planks remain. This is the Ship of Theseus, a thought experiment that asks a simple but tricky question. Is it still the same ship? At first, it might seem obvious that it is the same ship. The ship looks the same, works the same, and has the same name. The people who sail it treat it as the same vessel. When one plank is replaced, nothing really changes. You would not say the ship is brand new just because of one repair. But if you take this process to its end, and every single plank has been replaced, things become less clear. Now, no piece of the original material is left. Some people argue that the ship is no longer the same because nothing physical from the original remains. Others argue that identity is not about the parts themselves, but about the pattern and purpose they create together. Think about your own body. Cells die and are replaced all the time. After several years, almost every cell in your body is different from the ones you had before. Yet you do not wake up and think you are a different person. You have the same memories, relationships, and personality. Most people accept that they stay the same person even though their bodies change completely over time. This is similar to how some people see the Ship of Theseus. They say the ship stays the same because its role and design remain continuous. To make the puzzle even more interesting, imagine that someone collects all the old planks as they are removed. Over time, they use those original planks to rebuild another ship, one that looks just like the first one when it was new. Now there are two ships. Which one is the real Ship of Theseus? The one with the original planks but rebuilt from scratch? Or the one that has been maintained and sailed all along, but now has none of its original parts? Both seem to have a claim to being the original, yet they cannot both be the same single ship. This twist shows how identity is not only about physical pieces or history, but also about how we define continuity. Consider a simpler example. Imagine you have an old favorite jacket. Over the years, you sew patches on worn spots. Then you replace the lining. Later, you replace the zipper. Piece by piece, you repair it until no original fabric remains. Most people would still call it their jacket, especially if they have worn it through many important moments. Now imagine a friend takes the scraps you removed and stitches them back together into a jacket. Which one feels more like yours? Many would still say the repaired one because of the experiences and memories attached to it. This is how personal connection shapes our idea of identity. The Ship of Theseus problem matters beyond ships and jackets. It raises questions about how we think about ourselves and the world. For example, when a computer gets new parts, at what point does it become a new machine? If you swap out the hard drive, is it still the same computer? What if you replace every single part one by one? In the world of technology, this matters when dealing with repairs, warranties, or even artificial intelligence. A robot might receive upgrades over time. If every piece is replaced, is it still the same robot? This puzzle also connects to human identity in a deep way. Suppose a person receives medical implants, artificial organs, or even brain-computer connections. How much can be replaced before they stop being the same person? Many would say the key lies not in the parts, but in memory, personality, and consciousness. If those remain intact, the person remains the same. But what if those change as well? At what point do they become someone else? The Ship of Theseus shows how our sense of identity is built from both physical reality and human perspective. Some philosophers argue that identity comes from continuity over time. In this view, as long as changes happen gradually and the object serves the same role, it remains the same. Others argue that only the original material matters. If nothing from the start remains, the object has changed completely. Both sides have strong arguments, and neither can fully settle the puzzle. This thought experiment also appears in modern culture. In science fiction, characters are often rebuilt, cloned, or uploaded into computers. If a copy of someone's mind is placed in a new body, is it still them? Many stories play with this idea to explore what it means to be human. In a way, these stories are just new versions of the Ship of Theseus question. The materials may be digital instead of wooden planks, but the core issue remains the same. Imagine a beloved family home that has been standing for generations. Over time, the roof is replaced, the floors are refinished, the walls are rebuilt after damage, and even the foundation is repaired. Decades later, no original material remains, yet the house still feels like the same home. This shows how emotional ties and shared history shape our view of identity. For the family, it is not just wood and stone. It is a place filled with memories and meaning. This is why they see it as the same house, even when everything physical has changed. The Ship of Theseus does not give a final answer. Instead, it pushes people to think about how they define same and different. It asks whether identity lives in the parts themselves, the structure they create, or the experiences tied to them. The puzzle continues to be discussed because it touches on everyday life, personal identity, technology, and even questions about the soul. By examining it, we better understand how we connect with the things and people around us, even as they change over time. Imagine you build a time machine and set the controls to travel back to a time before you were born. You arrive at a moment when your grandfather is still young, before he has met your grandmother. Now suppose you do something that stops them from meeting, maybe by convincing him to move to another city or by causing an accident that changes his path in life. If they never meet, one of your parents is never born, and that means you are never born. If you are never born, how could you have traveled back in time to prevent their meeting in the first place? This is the heart of the Grandfather Paradox, a puzzle that exposes the contradictions in time travel. At first, the idea seems like a fun story problem, but when you look closer, you see how deep the problem goes. The paradox creates a loop where the past and future clash. If you exist, you can go back in time and change events. But if you change those events in a way that erases your own existence, you remove the very cause that made you travel back. This creates a logical problem with no clear answer. You both exist and do not exist at the same time, which breaks the basic rules of cause and effect. Think about a simpler chain of events. If you knock over a glass, the cause is your action, and the effect is the glass falling. The order is clear and fixed. In normal life, the past leads to the present, and the present leads to the future. Time travel shakes this order. If you go back and change something, you are placing an effect before its cause. You are making the future act on the past. That is why the paradox is so confusing. It challenges the very structure of time as we understand it. To see the problem in action, imagine a different scenario. Suppose you travel back in time to stop a terrible war. You prevent a key battle from happening, and as a result, the war never begins. In the world you create, there is no reason for you to travel back in time because there was no war to stop. If you never travel back, the battle happens after all, and the war begins again. The timeline flips back and forth between two outcomes, never settling on one. It is like trying to write a sentence where every word changes the meaning of the words before it. Some people try to solve the paradox by saying that time is fixed. In this view, when you travel to the past, you cannot change anything because whatever you do already happened. If you go back to the moment before your grandparents met, maybe you try to stop them, but you fail. Or maybe your actions are what caused them to meet in the first place. For example, imagine you knock over a basket while running through a market. Your grandfather stops to help your grandmother pick up the fallen items, and that is how they meet. In trying to stop them, you become the very reason they meet. This explanation avoids the paradox by making time unchangeable. You cannot create a loop because your actions were always part of history. Another way to solve the paradox is through the idea of multiple timelines or parallel universes. In this model, when you go back and prevent your grandparents from meeting, you do not erase your own past. Instead, you create a new branch of reality. In the original timeline, they met. Your parent was born, and so were you. In the new timeline, they never meet, and you are never born there. But you still exist in the original timeline, so you do not disappear. It is like drawing a second path on a map. The old path still exists, but now there is another route. Many science fiction stories use this idea to allow time travel without breaking logic. Consider a more personal example. Suppose you have an old photo of your family. You step into a time machine and travel back to the day the photo was taken. If you stand in front of the camera, you block the shot and change the picture. When you return to the present, there are two possible outcomes. If time is fixed, the photo remains exactly as you remember, and you realize that you must have been part of the scene all along. If multiple timelines exist, you might find two versions of the photo, one where you blocked it and one where you did not. This shows how different models of time lead to very different results. The grandfather paradox is not just about family trees. It raises questions about free will, destiny, and the nature of time. If the past cannot be changed, that suggests a world where every event is set in stone. Your choices are only illusions, and you are playing out a script that was written long ago. If the past can be changed, then reality becomes unstable, with endless versions of events branching out like the limbs of a tree. Each choice creates a new timeline, and there is no single, fixed history. Some scientists try to approach the problem with physics. They talk about space-time, wormholes, and quantum theory. In quantum mechanics, particles can exist in multiple states at once until they are observed. Some researchers suggest that this might allow time travel without paradoxes. If every possible event happens in a different branch of reality, then there is always a version of you that exists, no matter what changes you make. Others argue that the laws of physics may simply prevent time travel to the past. The universe might have built-in safeguards to stop contradictions before they happen. Even without real time machines, the paradox appears in everyday thinking. People often wonder what would happen if they could go back and change a choice. Maybe you think about a job you did not take or a conversation you wish you had handled differently. These thoughts are like small versions of time travel. You imagine a different past and try to see how it would affect the present. The grandfather paradox shows why this is so complicated. Every change would ripple outward, affecting countless other events in ways you cannot predict. In stories, the paradox creates powerful drama. A character might risk their existence by trying to fix a mistake in the past. As they act, they face the question of whether they can succeed without erasing themselves. These stories capture the tension between control and chaos, between what we wish to change and what we must accept. They remind us that time is not just a line on a clock, but a web of connections, fragile and tangled. The grandfather paradox remains a puzzle because it exposes the limits of how we understand time. It forces us to think about cause and effect in new ways, whether through fixed timelines, branching universes, or impossible barriers. The question challenges our ideas of reality. Even without a working time machine, it makes us ask what it really means to exist in a world where past, present, and future are tied together. Imagine someone says, "This statement is false." You try to figure out if the statement is true or false, but as soon as you choose one, you run into a problem. If the statement is true, then what it says must be correct, which means it is false. But if it is false, then what it says is incorrect, which would mean it is true. It flips back and forth endlessly, never settling on an answer. This is the liar's paradox, a puzzle made of words that traps logic in a loop. At first, it seems like a simple trick of language, but it raises deep questions about truth and meaning. Most statements can be tested against reality. If someone says, "It is raining," you can look outside. If rain is falling, the statement is true. If the sky is clear, it is false. But the liar's paradox does not point to anything in the world. It only talks about itself. That self-reference creates a problem. There is no clear way to test it because the truth of the statement depends entirely on itself. It is like trying to stand on your own shoulders to lift yourself off the ground. Consider a scenario with two people. The first person says, "Everything the second person says is false." The second person then says, "Everything the first person says is true." You now have two statements that depend on each other. If the first person is telling the truth, the second must always be lying. But if the second is lying, then the first is not telling the truth after all. Each claim changes the other, creating a loop with no stable answer. This shows how the paradox can appear between people, as well as within a single sentence. Another version of the paradox appears in everyday life when rules apply to themselves. Imagine a sign that reads, "Ignore this sign." If you follow the rule and ignore it, you are obeying the sign. But by obeying, you are also not ignoring it. If you choose to ignore it, you are disobeying it, which means you are actually following its instruction. Whether you obey or disobey, you end up doing both at once. The same kind of loop occurs when systems try to control themselves. This is why self-reference is so tricky. It creates situations where language or rules turn back on themselves in confusing ways. The paradox is not only a word game. It has serious implications for logic, mathematics, and even computer science. Long ago, philosophers and mathematicians wanted to build a perfect system of truth where every statement could be proven or disproven without contradiction. The liar's paradox showed that this dream might be impossible. If a system allows statements about itself, there is always a way to create a sentence that breaks the rules. This idea played a role in the work of Kurt Gödel, a mathematician who showed that no complete logical system can be both consistent and able to prove every truth about itself. In a way, the liar's paradox predicted this problem. You can see a similar issue in computer programs. Imagine you write a program that checks whether other programs run forever or stop. If you ask the program to check itself, it gets stuck in a loop. It cannot decide whether it will stop or keep running because it must know the answer before it can act. This is like the statement, "This statement is false." The program is trapped by self-reference, just as language is in the paradox. Problems like this are central to computer science, where they are called undecidable problems. They show the limits of what machines can calculate or predict. Consider a more down-to-earth example. A friend sends you a message that says, "I am lying right now." You think about whether to believe them. If they are telling the truth, then they are lying, which makes the message false. If they are lying, then they are telling the truth, which makes the message true. You cannot decide which is correct, because the statement changes depending on how you interpret it. This kind of puzzle can feel frustrating, but it also shows how much we rely on stable rules of communication. Without those rules, meaning falls apart. The paradox can even appear in laws and regulations. Imagine a law that says, "No laws apply to this law." If the law applies to itself, then it does not apply. If it does not apply, then it applies. This circular structure creates confusion, just like the liar's paradox. Governments and organizations work hard to avoid such contradictions because they can make rules impossible to enforce. Clear language and careful design are needed to prevent self-reference from causing chaos. Some people try to solve the paradox by saying that the statement is neither true nor false. Instead, it falls outside the normal rules of truth. In this view, the paradox is like a broken sentence or a trick question. It does not follow the usual structure, so it does not need an answer. Others argue that there may be more than two truth values, instead of just true or false. A statement could be both, or neither, or something in between. These ideas create more complex systems of logic, but they help deal with problems like the liar's paradox. Imagine a light switch that has 3 settings instead of 2: on, off, and both. In normal situations, the light is either on or off, but the 3rd setting allows for a special case where it is somehow both at once. This extra option might seem strange, but it gives you a way to handle unusual situations. In the same way, adding more truth values can give logic tools to deal with paradoxes. Still, this approach does not fully erase the puzzle. It only changes how we talk about it. The paradox also appears in art and stories. Writers and filmmakers use it to create mystery and tension. A character might speak in riddles that seem meaningful but contradict themselves. A painting might show itself being painted inside the same frame. These playful uses of self-reference draw attention to the limits of language and perception. They remind us that truth is not always simple and that our minds can be trapped by loops of meaning. Think of a mirror facing another mirror. The reflections go on forever, each one showing the next. The image has no clear beginning or end. The liar's paradox works in a similar way. When a statement refers to itself, it creates an endless hall of mirrors in logic. You cannot step outside to see the whole picture, because every reflection depends on the others. This image helps explain why the paradox feels so slippery. It is not just a single sentence, but a structure that folds back on itself endlessly. Even in everyday conversations, smaller versions of the paradox can appear. Someone might say, "I never tell the truth." If you believe them, they must be lying, which means they sometimes tell the truth. If you think they are lying, then perhaps they do always lie, which means they just told the truth. While this may seem like a playful trick, it shows how our minds seek stability in communication. We expect words to match reality in a consistent way. When they do not, we feel the same confusion that the paradox creates. The liar's paradox remains powerful because it reveals the boundaries of our systems of thought. It shows how truth can collapse when language turns inward on itself, whether in logic, computers, laws, or casual speech. The problem of self-reference is always nearby. It challenges us to think carefully about how we define truth and how we avoid falling into endless loops of contradiction. Imagine a race between Achilles, the fastest warrior of ancient Greece, and a slow-moving tortoise. To make the race fair, Achilles gives the tortoise a head start. The tortoise begins some distance ahead, while Achilles waits at the starting line. When the race begins, Achilles runs much faster, but Zeno's paradox claims that he can never actually catch up to the tortoise. This idea seems ridiculous at first because we all know that in real life, a fast runner easily passes a slow one. But when you break down the motion step by step, the puzzle becomes clear. As Achilles runs, the first thing he must do is reach the point where the tortoise started. By the time he arrives there, the tortoise has moved forward a little. Achilles then has to reach this new point. While he does that, the tortoise moves forward again, though by an even smaller amount. Each time Achilles reaches the spot where the tortoise was, the tortoise is already slightly ahead. This process repeats endlessly. No matter how fast Achilles runs, there will always be another tiny distance between them. According to the paradox, Achilles can get closer and closer, but he can never actually overtake the tortoise because there will always be one more step to take. To see why this is strange, imagine shrinking the distances. Suppose the tortoise starts 10 feet ahead. Achilles quickly runs those 10 feet, but while he does, the tortoise moves 1 foot. Achilles then covers that 1 foot and the tortoise moves 1/10 of a foot. Achilles covers that, and the tortoise moves 100th of a foot, and so on. The distances get smaller and smaller, but they never fully disappear. Zeno argued that since there are infinitely many steps, Achilles would need infinite time to complete them. If that were true, motion itself would be impossible. Even a simple act like walking across a room would require crossing an infinite number of halfway points. You would never actually arrive at your destination. This way of thinking challenges our basic understanding of movement. We see Achilles pass the tortoise in our minds and in reality, yet Zeno's reasoning seems sound. The paradox comes from the idea of dividing space and time into infinitely smaller pieces. In the real world, we move smoothly and continuously. But in Zeno's puzzle, every movement is split into separate tasks. The more you divide, the more steps appear, and the more impossible motion seems. Consider a modern example. Imagine you are driving to a coffee shop 1 mile away. First, you must travel half the distance, half a mile. Then you must travel half of what remains, 1/4 mile. Then half of what remains again, 1/8 of a mile, and so on. Each time you get closer, there is still another distance to cover. If you follow Zeno's logic, you will never arrive. Yet in everyday life, you do arrive, and you do so in a few minutes. The paradox shows that our common experience and our logical breakdown of motion seem to conflict. The puzzle gets even clearer if you think about time. When Achilles covers the first distance, it takes him a short amount of time. The next distance takes a shorter time. The next one is shorter still. If you add up these times, the total seems like it could go on forever. But in reality, the times form a series that gets smaller and smaller. Modern mathematics explains this by showing that even an infinite number of shrinking steps can add up to a finite total. For example, if you keep cutting a second in half, you get half a second, then 1/4, then 1/8, and so on. If you add them together, they sum to just 1 second. Achilles does not need infinite time to run infinite steps because the steps shrink so quickly that their total is still limited. This solution was not available to Zeno because the math for handling infinity did not exist in his time. The paradox can be visualized with a simple picture. Imagine drawing a line on paper. First, mark the halfway point. Then mark the halfway point of the remaining section. Keep marking halfway points. You can keep going forever, and you will never run out of smaller and smaller spaces to mark. This shows how space can be infinitely divided. But now imagine walking along the line. Even though you can divide it endlessly, in theory, in practice, you move smoothly from one end to the other without stopping at each point. The paradox comes from mixing these two views, the infinite division of theory and the continuous flow of reality. Zeno created his paradox to defend the ideas of his teacher, Parmenides, who argued that change and motion were illusions. If motion leads to contradictions when you analyze it carefully, perhaps motion is not real at all. From this point of view, when you see Achilles pass the tortoise, you are witnessing an illusion created by your senses. This was a radical idea in ancient Greece and sparked debates that lasted for centuries. Many thinkers tried to solve the puzzle, but without modern tools, they struggled to explain how motion could occur. Today, with the help of calculus and concepts like limits, we can describe infinite processes in a precise way. We understand that while there are infinitely many points between Achilles and the tortoise, the total distance can still be crossed in a finite time. The shrinking steps form what mathematicians call a convergent series. Each step adds less and less to the total until the sum reaches a fixed limit. This mathematical insight resolves the paradox on paper, but the puzzle remains valuable because it forces us to think about infinity and the nature of reality. Imagine another race to make the idea concrete. A sprinter lines up 10 feet behind a walking robot. The sprinter runs 10 times faster than the robot walks. Each time the sprinter reaches the point where the robot was, the robot has moved slightly ahead. After a few moments, the sprinter clearly passes the robot. We see it happen with our eyes, yet if you describe the event using Zeno's logic, it seems impossible. The sprinter must complete infinite tasks. The contradiction shows that our minds struggle to handle infinity. Our senses tell us one thing, and our reasoning tells us another. The paradox also connects to modern technology. In computer graphics, motion is created by showing a series of still images, each slightly different. The images are divided into frames, and there can be thousands of frames in a single movie. Each frame is like one of Zeno's steps. If you tried to think of the movie as a literal infinity of frames, you might wonder how motion is possible. But when the frames play quickly, our brains blend them into a smooth flow. This mirrors how real motion works. Even though we can divide it into countless moments, we experience it as continuous. Zeno's paradox about Achilles and the tortoise continues to spark thought because it touches on fundamental ideas. It shows how breaking reality into pieces can lead to strange results. It also shows the power of infinity, a concept that can be hard to grasp. While modern math gives us tools to explain how Achilles passes the tortoise, the puzzle still challenges our intuition. It reminds us that simple questions can reveal deep mysteries about time, space, and motion. Imagine a peaceful town where people believe in living side by side, no matter their differences. The people value tolerance, which means they allow others to hold different opinions, practice different beliefs, and live in different ways without fear of punishment or exclusion. Over time, a small group moves into the town. This group does not believe in tolerance. They think only their way of life is correct, and they openly state that anyone who disagrees with them should be silenced or removed. The townspeople, wanting to stay true to their values, tolerate the group's beliefs. They allow them to speak, organize, and spread their ideas freely. At first, this seems fair. Everyone has a voice. But as the group grows stronger, they begin to use that freedom to attack others. They demand that opposing voices be banned and that only their rules should apply. The tolerant town now faces a problem. If they continue to tolerate the intolerant group, they will lose the very freedom and safety they wanted to protect. This is the paradox of tolerance, an idea first described by the philosopher Karl Popper. It says that unlimited tolerance can destroy tolerance itself. A tolerant society is strong only if it refuses to tolerate actions that aim to crush tolerance. If it allows everything, even hatred and oppression, then in the end, only hatred and oppression will remain. The paradox shows that tolerance has limits. It cannot survive if it treats those who seek to destroy it the same as those who live peacefully. To see how this works, think of a simple example. Imagine you are hosting a community meeting. Everyone is welcome to speak and share ideas. Most people are respectful and listen to one another. But one person stands up and begins shouting that certain others should not be allowed to speak at all. If you tolerate this behavior and do nothing, soon others might copy it. Before long, only the loudest and most aggressive voices will be heard. The meeting, meant to be open and fair, will become a place where only one viewpoint can survive. By tolerating the intolerance of that first person, you have allowed the meeting to become intolerant. The very value you started with, openness, has been destroyed from within. The paradox becomes even clearer in politics. A democratic system relies on open debate, free speech, and fair laws. These rules protect everyone, including those with unpopular opinions. Now imagine a political group rises that does not believe in democracy. They use their free speech to spread their message. their right to organize to gain power, and the vote to win elections. Once they have enough control, they change the laws to silence their opponents and remove the freedoms that helped them rise in the first place. History shows many examples of this happening. In the early 20th century, extremist parties in Europe used democratic freedoms to gain power and then destroyed those freedoms once they ruled. People tolerated them too long, and by the time they acted, it was too late. Some people worry that limiting intolerance goes against the very idea of tolerance. They ask, if we ban certain ideas or groups, aren't we becoming intolerant ourselves? This is a fair question. The paradox does not mean that every harsh or critical opinion should be silenced. People can disagree strongly and still live together in a tolerant society. The line is crossed when a person or group works to deny others the basic right to exist, speak, or participate. Tolerance protects discussion and diversity, but it cannot protect those who seek to destroy those very things. It is like defending a house. You can welcome guests with different tastes and habits, but if someone tries to burn the house down, you cannot simply smile and let them do it. Stopping them is not betrayal, it is self-preservation. Consider an online community as another example. At first, the group has a simple rule. Everyone can post freely. Most people share ideas and have civil discussions. Then a few users begin posting hateful messages targeting others. Some members leave, unwilling to face constant harassment. If the community does nothing, the hateful users take over completely. Soon, only their voices remain. The community dies, not because it was too strict, but because it refused to set limits. This mirrors what can happen in societies. Without clear boundaries, intolerance spreads and pushes tolerance out. The paradox also applies on a personal level. Think about friendships or relationships. You may accept differences in beliefs or habits because you value harmony. But if someone constantly insults you, controls you, or denies your right to make choices, accepting that behavior only harms you. At some point, you must decide that certain actions are not acceptable. This is not because you are against difference, but because you are protecting yourself from harm. In the same way, a society must sometimes act against destructive forces to keep its core values alive. One challenge is deciding when to act. If a society acts too soon, it risks silencing harmless opinions. If it acts too late, intolerance may grow too strong to stop. This balance is difficult. Some thinkers argue that speech alone should not be punished, no matter how hateful, unless it directly leads to violence. Others believe that speech itself can be a form of harm if it calls for the removal of others' rights. There is no simple rule, but the paradox makes clear that inaction can have serious consequences. A real-world example can be seen in the fight against extremist propaganda. Governments often struggle with whether to ban groups that spread messages of hate. Allowing them to speak openly can seem like a sign of strength and freedom. Yet if those messages grow unchecked, they can inspire actions that tear apart the very system that allowed them to exist. Some countries choose strict limits on such groups, while others focus on countering their messages with education and debate. Both approaches reflect an attempt to solve the paradox: how to protect freedom without letting freedom destroy itself. Imagine a garden filled with many types of plants. You want all of them to grow together, so you decide to let everything grow freely. Even weeds. At first, the weeds seem harmless, but over time, they spread and choke out the other plants. If you never remove them, soon only weeds remain. In this way, absolute tolerance for all growth leads to the death of diversity. Pulling out the weeds is not intolerance, it is care for the whole garden. A society works the same way. It must sometimes act to prevent destructive forces from taking over. The paradox of tolerance forces us to face uncomfortable truths. It asks us to recognize that tolerance is not just a passive act of acceptance, but an active duty to protect the space where diversity can exist. Without boundaries, tolerance can be exploited by those who do not believe in it. The challenge lies in finding the courage to act when necessary and the wisdom to know when to let differences flourish. It is a delicate balance, one that every society must face as it decides what it is willing to protect and what it cannot allow to grow unchecked. Imagine a pile of sand on a beach. You look at it and say, "That's a heap of sand." Now you take away one single grain. It is still clearly a heap. You take away another grain and nothing seems different. If you keep removing grains one by one, at what point does it stop being a heap? Is there a single grain that changes it from a heap to just a scattered few grains? This question is the heart of the Sorites paradox, a puzzle about vague definitions and gradual change. The word heap has no precise boundary. You know a heap when you see one, but you cannot point to an exact number of grains that makes it a heap. If one grain does not matter, then removing one grain should never change its status. Following this reasoning, you could keep removing grains forever, and it would always remain a heap, even when no grains are left. That makes no sense, yet the logic seems impossible to escape. The same problem works in reverse. If you start with no sand at all and add one grain, you do not have a heap. Adding one more grain still does not create a heap. If each single grain cannot create a heap, then no matter how many you add, you will never reach a heap. This is equally absurd, yet it follows from the same line of thinking. The puzzle shows how vague language can lead to contradictions. Words like heap, bald, tall, and rich do not have exact cutoffs. For example, if someone has a full head of hair, they are not bald. Losing one hair does not make them bald. Losing another hair does not either. If you repeat this step many times, there must come a point where they are clearly bald, but there is no exact moment you can point to. The transition happens gradually. The same applies to height. If a person who is 6 feet tall is considered tall, and someone just a fraction shorter is also tall, then by that logic, you could keep reducing height little by little, and everyone would still be tall, even someone who is very short. This shows how unclear definitions can create confusion when applied step by step. Consider a pile of coins as another example. You might say a person is rich if they have a large number of coins. Take away one coin and they are still rich. Take away another and they remain rich. If this keeps happening, the person will eventually have no coins. Yet the reasoning says they are still rich. In real life, we know that a single coin does not define wealth. But at some point, a lack of coins clearly means poverty. The paradox comes from trying to find an exact dividing line in a situation where there is none. One way to understand the problem is by thinking about colors. Imagine a color gradient that fades slowly from blue to green. At one end, the color is clearly blue. At the other, it is clearly green. Somewhere in between, the shift happens, but there is no exact spot where you can say, this is the moment it stops being blue and starts being green. The change is continuous and subtle. The Sorites paradox works in a similar way. It shows how some categories in language are fuzzy rather than strict. They work well for everyday conversation, but they break down under precise logic. In daily life, we handle these fuzzy boundaries without trouble. When you say someone is tall, you do not need to know their exact height down to the millimeter. The word tall is useful even though it has no fixed limit. Problems arise when we try to apply strict reasoning to vague terms. The paradox reveals the gap between the way language works and the way logical rules work. Language often relies on context and shared understanding rather than clear definitions. This works well in most cases, but creates puzzles when examined closely. Philosophers have offered different ways to address the paradox. One idea is to accept that some concepts are inherently vague and cannot be forced into sharp boundaries. In this view, the lack of precision is not a flaw, but a feature of how we describe the world. Another approach tries to draw an artificial line for practical purposes. For example, a tax law might define someone as rich if they earn a certain amount of money per year. This does not capture the full meaning of wealth, but it creates a clear rule for decisions. In the case of the sand, you could decide that a heap must contain at least 1,000 grains. This would solve the problem for counting, even if it feels arbitrary. A different approach uses probability. Instead of saying a pile is or is not a heap, you assign a degree of certainty. A pile of 10,000 grains is almost certainly a heap. A pile of 2 grains is almost certainly not. In between, you can have varying levels of likelihood. This mirrors how people often think in real life. You might say someone is kind of tall or borderline rich. These expressions reflect uncertainty and gradual change. Probability allows logic to capture this middle ground without forcing a strict yes or no answer. Imagine a more personal situation. Think about a relationship that slowly changes over time. At first, 2 people are close friends. Small disagreements appear, but they seem minor. Over months or years, these little changes add up. One day, they realize they are no longer friends in the same way. There was no single moment when the friendship ended, just as there is no single grain that turns a pile into a heap or takes it away. The process is gradual and hard to pinpoint. The Sorites paradox helps explain why some transitions in life feel unclear or difficult to define. The paradox also appears in technology. Consider a phone battery draining. At 100%, the battery is full. At 99%, it is still full. Dropping 1 more percent does not suddenly make it empty. You could keep going down step by step, and there is no exact percentage where full turns into empty. Manufacturers solve this by using labels like low battery at certain points. These labels are not perfect reflections of reality, but they provide useful guidance. This is similar to how societies create rules to manage vague concepts like wealth, poverty, or safety. The Sorites paradox is not just about abstract puzzles. It appears in real debates about law, ethics, and identity. For example, when does a fetus become a person with legal rights? When does a cluster of cells become a living being? When does an adult become elderly? These questions are difficult because they involve gradual change with no clear cutoff. People create laws and policies to set boundaries, but these are often controversial because they feel arbitrary. The paradox shows why such debates are so challenging. It is not always possible to draw a perfect line in a world that changes step by step. The sand heap puzzle may seem simple, but it reveals a deep truth about how humans think and speak. Many concepts we use every day are built on gradual differences rather than clear separations. We live in a world of shades rather than strict lines. The Sorites paradox reminds us that language is a tool shaped by experience, not a perfect system of logic. It shows how small changes, each seeming unimportant on their own, can lead to big changes over time without a single defining moment. Imagine a being with unlimited power. It can do anything at all without limits. Now, consider this question. Can that being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? If it can create such a rock, then there is something it cannot do. It cannot lift the rock. If it cannot create the rock, then there is still something it cannot do. It cannot create that rock in the first place. Either way, there appears to be a task beyond its power. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, a puzzle about the very idea of absolute power. The problem comes from the way the question is set up. It uses the idea of all-powerful in a way that turns back on itself. At first glance, an all-powerful being should be able to do anything, no matter how extreme or impossible. But when the task involves creating a situation where the being cannot act, the definition of anything becomes tangled. The puzzle is like a loop, where every answer contradicts itself. If the being succeeds, it fails, and if it fails, it still fails. To see this more clearly, think about a simpler example. Imagine someone who claims they can do absolutely everything. You ask them, "Can you draw a square circle?" A square circle cannot exist because the words cancel each other out. If they say yes, they're claiming to do something meaningless. If they say no, then there is at least one thing they cannot do. The paradox about the rock works the same way. It combines two conflicting ideas, the ability to create anything and the inability to lift what was created. It is like asking for a shape that cannot exist. The contradiction is built into the question. Consider a different scenario. Imagine a ruler who has complete control over a kingdom. She can make any law she wants, and everyone must follow it. Now, imagine she decides to make a law that says, "I will no longer have complete control." By passing this law, she gives up her power. Once the law is in place, she cannot undo it without breaking the rule she created. If she cannot undo it, then she is not truly all-powerful. If she can undo it, then the law never really limited her in the first place. This mirrors the rock puzzle. It shows how creating a limit can conflict with the idea of having no limits. The paradox raises deep questions about the nature of power. Some thinkers say that absolute power must include the ability to do the logically impossible, like making a square circle or creating a rock too heavy to lift. Others argue that logical impossibilities are not real tasks at all. In this view, asking an all-powerful being to create a rock it cannot lift is like asking it to make 2 + 2 = 5. The problem does not lie in the being's limits, but in the nonsense of the request. Power, they argue, applies only to things that are logically possible. To explore this, think about language. If someone says, "I can speak every language," and you ask them to speak a language made up of random sounds with no rules, they might answer, "That's not a real language." Similarly, the being might say that creating an unliftable rock is not a real task. It is only a jumble of words. This way of thinking suggests that omnipotence means the power to do anything meaningful, not anything that can be phrased as a sentence. Some philosophers approach the puzzle by redefining omnipotence. Instead of seeing it as unlimited power to do literally anything, they define it as the greatest possible power within the realm of reason. Under this definition, the paradox disappears. The being cannot create a rock too heavy to lift because such a thing is impossible by nature. This does not show weakness, but rather that true power does not include nonsense. In this way, the being remains all-powerful, even though there are things it cannot do, because those things are not really things at all. Consider how this works in everyday life. Imagine a skilled carpenter. She can build any kind of furniture: chairs, tables, cabinets. You ask her to build a chair that has no seat, no back, no legs, and cannot be used for sitting. She would tell you that this is not a chair at all. The request itself makes no sense. It is not that her skills have limits, but that your description is meaningless. The same logic applies to the rock paradox. The problem comes from the way the question is framed, not from any real limit on ability. The paradox also appears in discussions about free will and control. Imagine a parent who wants complete authority over their child, but also wants the child to act freely. If the child acts freely, the parent does not control everything. If the parent controls every choice, the child has no freedom. The two desires conflict. In the same way, the rock paradox shows how two aspects of power can clash when taken to extremes. Total control and the creation of true independence may not be possible together. In religious thought, the paradox often comes up in discussions about the nature of a divine being. Some people use it to challenge the idea of an all-powerful God. If there is a task that cannot be done, does that mean the being is not truly all-powerful? Others respond by saying that divine power works differently from human power. They argue that a god's nature might include perfect consistency and logic, so the paradox is based on a misunderstanding. From this perspective, asking whether a god can create an unliftable rock is like asking whether it can be both perfectly good and perfectly evil at the same time. The question misunderstands the nature of what is being described. The puzzle can even appear in technology. Imagine designing a computer program that can override any other program. If it must also be able to override itself, you face a problem. If it succeeds in overriding itself, it no longer has control. If it fails, then there is at least one program it cannot override, its own. This mirrors the logic of the paradox. It shows how systems of control can run into contradictions when they turn inward. The paradox also has a practical side when thinking about leadership and decision-making. A leader may claim to have total authority, but if that leader creates independent institutions, like courts or councils, those bodies can limit the leader's power. If the leader cannot overrule them, power is no longer absolute. If the leader can overrule them at any time, then those bodies were never truly independent. This shows how real-world power struggles can reflect the same logical problem as the rock puzzle. Imagine a game where one player has the rule-making power. The player can change the rules at any moment. Now suppose they make a rule that says, "I cannot change this rule." If they follow it, they have given up their ultimate power. If they ignore it, then the rule never really mattered. This simple example captures the essence of the paradox. Unlimited power seems to include the power to limit itself, but using that power creates a contradiction. The Omnipotence Paradox remains interesting because it shows how language, logic, and power interact. It is not just about rocks or strength. It is about how we define the very idea of doing anything. By exploring it, we see the limits of our own concepts and how absolute ideas can twist back on themselves when pushed to the extreme. Imagine a small town with a single barber. This barber has a unique rule. He shaves every man in town who does not shave himself, and he never shaves anyone who does shave himself. At first, this sounds clear and simple. Each man in town either shaves himself or he goes to the barber. But then a question arises: who shaves the barber? If the barber shaves himself, he is breaking his own rule because he is only supposed to shave men who do not shave themselves. If he does not shave himself, then he must go to the barber for a shave. But the barber is himself, so that would mean he does shave himself. Both options lead to a contradiction. There is no way to answer the question without breaking the rule. This is the Barber Paradox, a puzzle about self-reference and logic. The barber's situation is like a trap built into language. The rule works perfectly for every other man in the town, but when applied to the barber himself, it collapses. The problem comes from the rule being applied to its own source. It is like a snake eating its own tail or a mirror reflecting another mirror. The loop has no clear end, and the logic cannot settle. To see why this happens, think about a simpler example. Imagine a sign in a shop window that says, "Ignore this sign." If you ignore it, you are following the instruction. But if you are following it, you are not really ignoring it, which means you are disobeying the sign. If you disobey it by not ignoring it, then you are actually following it. The loop never stops. The sign, like the barber's rule, creates a cycle that logic cannot break. Another way to understand the paradox is through questions of truth and falsehood. Consider the statement, "This statement is false." If the statement is true, then it must be false as it claims. But if it is false, then it must be true because it says it is false. The barber puzzle works in a similar way, but instead of truth and falsehood, it uses action, shaving or not shaving. The barber's role depends on his own action in a way that leads to contradiction. Now imagine applying the same idea to a group rather than a single person. Think of a club with one rule. Members may only join if they are not already members. When someone tries to join, the rule applies to them as they are joining. If they are not a member, they qualify to join, but as soon as they join, they are breaking the rule. If they are already a member, they cannot join at all. No one can ever satisfy the rule, just like the barber can never satisfy his shaving rule. This shows how self-reference can break a system, whether it involves shaving, joining, or following rules. The paradox is not just a puzzle about barbers or clubs. It points to a deeper problem in logic and mathematics. Early in the 20th century, mathematicians were trying to build a perfect, consistent system for all of mathematics. Bertrand Russell, a famous philosopher and mathematician, discovered the Barber puzzle as a way to show why this task was so difficult. His paradox, which inspired the Barber story, dealt with sets. A set is a collection of things. Some sets contain themselves, and some do not. For example, a set of all sets with more than 3 elements does not contain itself because it is not a group of physical objects. But now consider the set of all sets that do not contain themselves. Does this set contain itself? If it does, then it should not, and if it does not, then it should. The problem mirrors the barber's dilemma. The town becomes the world of sets, and the barber becomes the special set defined by the rule. This problem was serious because it showed that even simple ideas could lead to contradictions if not handled carefully. If you let a system define itself without limits, you risk creating loops that cannot be resolved. Russell's work led to changes in how mathematics and logic were built. Rules were added to prevent sets or statements from directly referring to themselves in ways that cause paradoxes. The Barber puzzle also appears in everyday systems. Imagine a company that has a rule saying only employees who do not follow company rules must be punished. Now consider a manager trying to apply this rule to themselves. If they follow the rules, they do not need to be punished. But if they do not follow the rules, they must be punished. If punishing themselves counts as following the rule, they end up in a loop. The company's rule works fine for others, but breaks when it applies to the person enforcing it. This shows why real-world systems often need checks and balances. If one person or rule controls itself completely, contradictions can arise. Consider a more personal example. Suppose you promise a friend, "I will never keep a promise to you." If you keep the promise, you are breaking it. If you break the promise, you are actually keeping it. No matter what you do, you are both keeping and breaking the promise at the same time. The Barber puzzle is like this. But instead of promises, it uses shaving as the action that creates the loop. To visualize the problem, imagine 2 mirrors facing each other. Each mirror reflects the other, creating an endless tunnel of reflections. The Barber Paradox works the same way, but with logic instead of light. Each answer reflects back into the question, creating an infinite loop. You never reach a final point where the reflection stops. This is why the puzzle feels so unsolvable. It is not about finding the right answer, but about seeing that the question itself is flawed. Some people try to solve the paradox by suggesting that the barber cannot exist. In other words, the rule about who he shaves is impossible to fulfill, so no real barber could follow it. This makes sense in the story. The town cannot have such a barber without breaking logic. Others suggest rewriting the rule so it does not apply to the barber himself. For example, the rule might say, "The barber shaves every man in town except himself." This avoids the contradiction by creating a clear exception. In mathematics, similar strategies are used. Systems are carefully designed to prevent definitions from looping back on themselves in destructive ways. The puzzle also helps explain why some problems in computer science are so challenging. Imagine writing a computer program that checks whether other programs will run forever or eventually stop. Now imagine asking that program to check itself. If it says it will stop, then it must stop. But if it stops, it has contradicted its own prediction. If it says it will run forever, then it must run forever. But if it runs forever, it has contradicted its own prediction again. This is known as the halting problem, and it mirrors the Barber Paradox in the world of machines. Both involve a system trying to fully describe or control itself and getting stuck in a loop. The Barber Paradox shows that not every rule or definition can apply to itself without problems. It reminds us that language and logic need boundaries to stay consistent. When rules turn inward and try to govern themselves, contradictions can appear, making it clear that some ideas cannot exist as they are described. Imagine walking into an ice cream shop, expecting to treat yourself to something sweet. You picture a simple choice between chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry. Instead, you find a menu with 100 flavors. At first, you feel excited. The sheer number of options makes it seem like you will find the perfect flavor. You take your time looking through the list, but as you read more, you begin to feel uneasy. For every flavor you consider, another one catches your eye. Maybe you want chocolate fudge, but then there's salted caramel, pistachio, or cookies and cream. You start thinking about what you might miss if you make the wrong choice. By the time you step up to the counter, you feel stressed, not happy. Even after you decide, you walk away wondering if you should have picked something else. Instead of enjoying your ice cream, you second-guess yourself. This is the paradox of choice. The paradox shows how having more options can seem like a benefit at first, but can actually lead to frustration, confusion, and regret. In theory, more choices give you more freedom. You can select the exact thing that fits your needs and desires. But in practice, too many options can overwhelm your mind. You start to worry about making a mistake, and this worry grows with each extra possibility. Instead of feeling free, you feel trapped by the need to choose. Consider buying a pair of jeans. If a store has only 3 styles, the decision is quick. You compare them, pick the one that fits best, and move on. But if the store offers 50 styles, the process becomes more complicated. You begin to think about rise, cut, color, stretch, and fabric. You may try on several pairs, but no matter which one you choose, you wonder if another pair might have been better. The simple act of buying jeans turns into a stressful experience. This example shows how choice can shift from a source of joy to a burden. Psychologists have studied this effect in many experiments. In one study, researchers set up a table in a grocery store. Sometimes the table had 6 kinds of jam for customers to taste. Other times, it had 24 kinds. When there were 24 jams, more people stopped to sample them. The large display attracted attention. But when it came to making a purchase, customers were far more likely to buy jam when there were only 6 options. With too many choices, people felt overwhelmed and walked away without buying anything. The study shows how a large number of options can lead to decision paralysis. You want to choose, but the mental effort required becomes too great. The paradox does not only affect shopping, it shows up in big life decisions as well. Think about careers. A young person graduating from school may have hundreds of possible paths. They can work in different industries, move to different cities, or continue their education. This range of possibilities can feel exciting, but it can also cause anxiety. If they choose one path, they must give up all the others. They might worry about picking the wrong career and wasting years of their life. The pressure to make the perfect choice can make it hard to move forward at all. Some people freeze in place, doing nothing because they fear making a mistake. Others make a decision, but later feel regret, even if their choice was a good one. Regret is a key part of the paradox. When you have only a few options, it is easier to accept the outcome. If there were only 3 flavors of ice cream, you would enjoy the one you picked. But when there are 100 flavors, it is easy to imagine that one of the others would have been better. This imagining creates a sense of loss. Even if you enjoy your choice, you feel less satisfied because you focus on what you missed. Psychologists call this counterfactual thinking, dwelling on what could have been instead of appreciating what is. The modern world adds to this problem. Online shopping, streaming services, and social media all increase the number of choices we face. You can spend hours scrolling through movies, clothes, or products, always thinking the perfect option might be just one more click away. This endless search can lead to exhaustion. People sometimes feel burned out, not for lack of choice, but from too much of it. The paradox shows why abundance can become a source of stress rather than happiness. Consider dating apps as another example. In the past, people met partners through friends, work, or their local community. The pool of potential matches was small, which made choices more limited but also simpler. With modern apps, you can swipe through thousands of profiles. This seems like an advantage at first. You have a world of possibilities at your fingertips. But the endless supply of potential partners can make it hard to commit. You may always wonder if someone better is just a swipe away. This can lead to shallow connections and constant dissatisfaction, even when you meet someone great. The paradox of choice also affects how people view their own decisions after they make them. When there are many options, expectations rise. If you have dozens of choices, you expect your final decision to be amazing. If it falls short in any way, you blame yourself. You think, with so many possibilities, I should have found the perfect one. This self-blame can lead to disappointment and frustration. In contrast, when choices are limited, you are more likely to feel content. You recognize that you picked the best available option, even if it is not perfect. There are ways people naturally cope with too much choice. Some create personal rules to narrow their options. For example, a person might always order the same dish at a restaurant to avoid decision fatigue. Others rely on trusted recommendations, like reading reviews or asking friends, to filter out most options before deciding. These strategies reduce the mental burden of choice by cutting through the noise. Imagine shopping for a new phone. Without guidance, you might face hundreds of models, each with different features and prices. By setting a budget, choosing a few key features, and reading trusted reviews, you can narrow the list to 3 or 4 strong options. This makes the decision manageable and less stressful. Limiting choices can feel restrictive at first, but it often leads to greater satisfaction because it prevents you from drowning in endless possibilities. The paradox can also appear in smaller, everyday decisions. Think about streaming services. You sit down to watch a movie, but there are thousands of titles available. You scroll for 20 minutes, unable to decide. When you finally pick something, you feel less excited than if you had chosen quickly. The time spent searching creates frustration, and you may even stop watching halfway through, wondering if you made the wrong choice. In contrast, if you had only 3 movies to choose from, you would likely pick one fast and enjoy it fully. The key insight of the paradox is that more is not always better. While some choice is necessary for freedom and individuality, too much choice can lead to confusion, paralysis, and regret. Humans have limited mental energy, and when faced with too many decisions, that energy is drained. Instead of feeling empowered, people feel burdened. This is why some of the happiest moments in life come not from having every possible option, but from having just enough to make a meaningful choice without being overwhelmed. Imagine you love music so much that you want to meet your favorite composer, someone whose work has shaped history. You invent a time machine and travel back to meet them. When you arrive, you find that they have not yet written any music at all. Wanting to preserve history, you hand them a collection of their famous works, so they can publish them. The composer takes the sheet music, releases it to the world, and becomes celebrated for their genius. Centuries later, you are inspired by these same works to build your time machine and go back to deliver them. The question then arises, who actually created the music? It was never truly written in the first place. The works exist in a closed loop of cause and effect, without an original source. This is the Bootstrap Paradox. The paradox shows a strange and unsettling idea about time travel. In this scenario, an object or piece of information exists but has no clear point of origin. It is passed from the future to the past and back again, endlessly. The name comes from the phrase pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, which describes doing something impossible without outside help. In this case, the music seems to create itself out of nothing, as though it pulled itself into existence. To make this clearer, think about a more ordinary object. Imagine you own a pocket watch that you inherited from your grandfather. You travel back in time and meet him when he is young. You hand him the pocket watch before you leave. Years later, he grows older, passes it down through the family, and eventually, it comes back to you. Then you travel back and give it to him again. The watch exists in a continuous loop, always passed along, never built or bought. At no point can you say where it first came from. It has no beginning. It simply exists because it always has. This creates a puzzle about cause and effect. Normally, every event has a clear order. A writer creates a manuscript. A builder constructs a house. A factory produces a watch. There is a timeline, first cause, then effect. In the Bootstrap Paradox, the timeline folds in on itself. The cause is the effect, and the effect is the cause. The loop has no outside starting point. It defies the usual rules of logic because it suggests that something can exist without ever being created. Consider a modern twist involving technology. Suppose a scientist in the future develops a groundbreaking formula for clean energy. They write it down and publish it. Years later, you travel back in time with a copy of their formula and give it to a younger version of the same scientist before they have discovered it. They use the formula to build their career and later publish it, just as history recorded. The question becomes, who actually invented the formula if they only had it because you brought it back, and you only brought it back because they had it? The chain of events forms a circle. There is no true inventor, yet the formula exists and changes the world. This paradox also applies to ideas, stories, and cultural works. Imagine a famous novel that inspires countless people. In the future, you read the book and love it so much that you travel back to meet the author. When you arrive, you discover they have never heard of the story. Wanting to preserve history, you give them a copy of the book. They publish it, and it becomes famous. Centuries later, you grow up reading it, and the cycle continues. The novel has no origin. It exists only because it was passed through time in a loop. The paradox raises deep questions about free will and creation. If the composer, scientist, or author never truly created their work, can they take credit for it? If you bring the work back in time, are you the real creator, or are you simply delivering something that already existed? In the loop, both answers seem wrong. Neither you nor they can claim to be the source. The work seems to exist outside of normal causality, like an object floating free of time itself. It also challenges our understanding of reality. We usually think of time as a straight line, past, present, future. Events happen in order, and one moment leads to the next. The Bootstrap Paradox bends this line into a circle. The future shapes the past, and the past shapes the future, with no clear beginning. This creates confusion because our minds are built to think in terms of cause, leading to effect. When the two merge, our usual way of explaining events falls apart. To picture the problem, imagine a loop of string lying on a table. There is no point you can call the start of the loop. You can trace it endlessly without finding a beginning or an end. The paradox works the same way. The watch, the music, or the formula exists in a timeline shaped like a loop. It is always there because it always was, with no first moment to explain it. The puzzle becomes even stranger when you think about information. Suppose you write down the design for a new kind of machine. Years later, someone from the future travels back and hands you that very design when you are young. You build the machine and share the design with others. Decades later, the same design makes its way back to the traveler, who then takes it to the past to give to you. The information about how to build the machine has no origin. It never came from a mind or a moment of invention. It simply exists, passed around forever. Some scientists and philosophers suggest that this type of loop may not be truly impossible. In certain theories of time travel, events can form closed loops called causal loops. These loops are stable and self-contained. Everything within them fits together perfectly, even if it seems strange. In this view, the pocket watch or the sheet music can exist without a clear origin because the timeline supports itself. The loop does not need an outside cause, just as a circle does not need a starting point to exist. Others argue that the paradox shows why time travel to the past may be impossible. If objects or information could appear without ever being created, it would violate the basic principle that everything comes from somewhere. This principle, called causality, is a cornerstone of how we understand the universe. Allowing events without causes could lead to endless confusion and contradictions. For this reason, some theories suggest that the universe has built-in rules to prevent causal loops from forming. Even without real time machines, the Bootstrap Paradox has meaning in everyday life. It appears in stories, myths, and films. A common plot involves a hero who travels back in time and becomes the source of something they once believed came from another person. In these stories, the paradox creates mystery and wonder. It also invites the audience to think about how much of the world depends on clear beginnings and endings. By imagining a world without them, we see how fragile our sense of time can be. The Bootstrap Paradox forces us to question what it means for something to exist. If a song, a machine, or even an idea can appear without origin, then the line between cause and effect begins to blur. It suggests that our understanding of time is incomplete and that reality may hold structures beyond our usual ways of thinking. Even if time travel never becomes real, the puzzle remains a powerful way to explore the limits of logic and imagination. Imagine a sealed box sitting on a table. Inside the box is a cat. Alongside the cat, there is a small amount of radioactive material, a Geiger counter to detect radiation, a vial of poison, and a device that will break the vial if radiation is detected. The setup works like this. If the Geiger counter senses even a single atom of radiation decay, the device triggers and releases the poison, killing the cat. If no radiation decay is detected, the cat remains alive. The box is sealed, so no one can see or hear what is happening inside. Until the box is opened, you have no way of knowing whether the cat is alive or dead. In classical thinking, the cat must be in one state or the other. It is either alive or dead, even if you do not know which. But quantum physics suggests something very different. At the quantum level, particles can exist in a state called superposition, where they are in multiple states at the same time. For example, an atom of radioactive material can be both decayed and not decayed at once. In this thought experiment, the cat's life is directly tied to that atom. If the atom is in superposition, then the cat is also in superposition. This means the cat is both alive and dead at the same time, at least until someone opens the box and observes it. This idea sounds strange, even impossible. How can a cat be both alive and dead? To understand, think about flipping a coin. Before you look at the coin, it is either heads or tails. You just do not know which. That is ordinary uncertainty. Superposition is not like that. It is as if the coin is both heads and tails at once, until you look at it. When you finally lift your hand to check, the coin chooses one outcome. In quantum physics, this is called the collapse of the wave function. Observation forces the system to settle into a single state. Before that moment, it exists in all possible states at once. Erwin Schrödinger, the physicist who created this thought experiment, wanted to show how strange and even absurd quantum mechanics can seem when applied to everyday objects. In the world of tiny particles, like electrons and photons, superposition is a common and well-tested phenomenon. Experiments have shown particles behaving as if they are in many places at the same time. Schrödinger imagined what would happen if you extended this logic to something large and familiar, like a cat. The result is a situation that seems impossible, a living creature both alive and dead. The sealed box plays a crucial role in this puzzle. Because you cannot observe what is happening inside, the system remains in superposition. The moment you open the box, you break the superposition. The cat is instantly revealed to be either alive or dead. This highlights a key problem in quantum theory. Does observation create reality, or does it just reveal a reality that was already there? If the cat's state depends on being observed, then reality itself seems to depend on measurement. This is very different from how we usually think about the world. To make this clearer, imagine a simpler version. Suppose you place a single particle in a device that can detect its position. The particle has two possible paths, left or right. In classical physics, the particle travels one path, even if you do not know which. In quantum physics, before you measure it, the particle exists in both paths at once. Only when you measure it do you find out which path it took. The act of measuring changes the system. This is the same idea that plays out in the cat scenario, just on a much larger scale. The paradox becomes even more interesting when you think about information. While the box is sealed, you have no information about the cat's condition. The moment you open it, you gain information, and the system collapses into one reality. This suggests a deep link between knowledge and existence. It raises the question of whether reality is fixed, or whether it depends on the act of observation. Quantum superposition has been confirmed many times in laboratories. Scientists have seen particles interfere with themselves, like a single photon passing through two slits at the same time in an experiment. But when scaled up to something like a cat, the idea becomes unsettling. In practice, large objects do not behave this way because of a process called decoherence. The environment interacts with large systems constantly, forcing them into definite states before we ever look at them. In other words, a real cat in a real box would not truly be alive and dead at the same time. Schrödinger's example was meant as a thought experiment to show the weirdness of the theory, not to suggest that anyone should actually try it. Still, the thought experiment has powerful implications. It challenges how we think about existence and reality. If a small particle can be in two contradictory states at once, what does that mean for the universe as a whole? It suggests that at a fundamental level, reality might not be as solid and fixed as it seems. Instead, it could be a collection of possibilities, with observation acting as the final step that brings one possibility into being. Consider a deck of cards. You shuffle it and place it face down. The top card is either the ace of spades or it is not, even if you do not know which. That is how everyday objects behave. Now imagine a deck where the top card is every card in the deck at once. Only when you turn it over does it become a single card. This is closer to how quantum systems behave. Schrödinger's cat takes this concept and applies it to life and death, making it far more dramatic and thought-provoking. The paradox also connects to modern technology. Quantum computers, for example, rely on superposition to perform calculations. A normal computer uses bits that are either 0 or 1. A quantum computer uses qubits, which can be both 0 and 1 at the same time. This allows it to process many possibilities at once, giving it power far beyond classical computers. In this way, the strange behavior of particles that Schrödinger highlighted has become the foundation of cutting-edge science and technology. Another way to think about the paradox is through storytelling. Imagine a mystery novel where two different endings are written. In one, the detective solves the case, and in the other, the villain escapes. Before you read the final chapter, both endings exist in a sense. The story is undecided. When you read it, you choose one ending and close off the other. The sealed box is like that unwritten chapter. The cat's fate is undecided until you read it by opening the box. The puzzle has also inspired many debates about interpretation. Some scientists believe that opening the box simply reveals a state that was already fixed but hidden. Others believe that all possibilities exist in parallel universes, and opening the box merely shows you which branch you are on. In one branch, the cat lives. In another, it dies. Both realities are real, but you only experience one of them. This view is known as the many worlds interpretation, and it offers a way to avoid the idea of collapse entirely. Schrödinger's cat continues to capture attention because it combines deep science with a vivid image. It shows how strange the world of quantum physics is when compared to everyday experience. A cat that is both alive and dead at the same time challenges our basic understanding of life, death, and reality. Even though no one has ever placed a real cat in such a box, the thought experiment remains a powerful way to explore the mysteries of the quantum world and the role of observation in shaping what we see. Imagine two identical twins, Alex and Jamie. They are the same age and live normal lives on Earth. One day, Alex decides to take a journey into space on a ship that can travel very close to the speed of light. Jamie stays on Earth. The plan is simple. Alex will travel far into space at high speed, turn around, and come back. Before Alex leaves, the twins compare watches and agree to check them again when Alex returns. From Jamie's point of view, time passes normally on Earth. Days turn into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years. Jamie works, sleeps, and grows older at the usual pace. But for Alex, things are very different. Because the spaceship is moving so fast, time aboard the ship slows down compared to time on Earth. This effect is called time dilation, a key idea in Einstein's theory of relativity. The faster an object moves, the slower time flows for it, relative to someone who is not moving at that speed. For Alex, the trip feels normal. The clocks on the ship tick at their usual rate, and Alex experiences each second, minute, and hour just like Jamie does on Earth. But when Alex looks back at Earth through the ship's systems, it appears that everything there is moving much faster. From Alex's perspective, Earth's clocks seem to race ahead. If Alex sends a message home, it takes a long time to arrive, and by the time a reply comes back, much more time has passed on Earth than on the ship. Now imagine the moment of return. When Alex lands and steps out of the ship, Jamie rushes to meet them. At first, they are both excited to see each other. But when they compare ages, they are shocked. Jamie has grown much older, while Alex has only aged a little. Maybe Alex feels like only 5 years have passed, but for Jamie, 50 years have gone by. The twins started out the same age, yet now there is a huge difference. Alex looks young and healthy, while Jamie has gray hair and wrinkles. This strange result is the twin paradox. The puzzle comes from how we usually think about motion. If motion is relative, then couldn't Alex and Jamie each claim that the other was moving? From Alex's point of view, Earth is the thing that sped away, while the ship stayed still. If that were true, shouldn't time slow down for Jamie instead of Alex? This seems logical, but the situation is not perfectly balanced. The key difference is that Alex's journey involves turning around and changing speed, while Jamie stays on Earth the whole time. The acceleration that Alex experiences breaks the symmetry. Only Alex's frame of reference changes, so only Alex experiences the extreme time dilation. To picture this more clearly, think about two people walking toward each other. If both walk at the same speed, they might argue about who is really moving. From their point of view, either story makes sense. But if one of them suddenly stops, turns around, and walks back, it becomes clear who changed direction. In the twin paradox, Alex's spaceship is like the person who turns around. The acceleration makes Alex's situation different from Jamie's, and that difference explains why Alex ages less. This effect is not just a theoretical idea. Scientists have measured time dilation with real experiments. In one test, extremely accurate atomic clocks were placed on airplanes and flown around the world, while identical clocks stayed on the ground. When the clocks were compared afterward, the moving clocks had recorded slightly less time than the stationary ones. The difference was tiny because the planes moved much slower than light, but it matched Einstein's predictions exactly. Satellites in orbit also experience time dilation. Engineers must adjust for this effect so that GPS systems work correctly. Without these adjustments, navigation systems would quickly drift off course. Consider a smaller example with simpler numbers. Suppose Alex's spaceship travels at 99.5% of the speed of light. For every year that passes on the ship, 10 years pass on Earth. If Alex takes a 2-year trip by ship, only 2 years go by for Alex, but 20 years pass for Jamie. When they reunite, Alex is 2 years older, while Jamie has aged 20 years. The difference is dramatic, even though both experience time normally from their own perspective. The paradox challenges our everyday understanding of time. We usually think of time as a steady flow, the same for everyone. A second on one person's watch is the same as a second on another's. Relativity shows that this is not true when speeds become extreme. Time is flexible. It stretches and shrinks depending on motion and gravity. What feels normal to one observer may look completely different to another. To visualize this, imagine a loaf of bread as space and time combined. Each slice represents a moment in time. In everyday life, the slices are stacked neatly, and everyone moves through them at the same rate. But near the speed of light, the loaf tilts. The slices are no longer aligned. For Alex, moving on the spaceship, the path through the loaf cuts at an angle. This tilted path makes Alex's experience of time different from Jamie's, even though they are part of the same loaf. This difference has surprising consequences for communication. During Alex's journey, messages between the twins would be affected by time dilation. If Alex sent a message saying, "Hello," Jamie might receive it instantly or with a short delay depending on distance. But by the time Jamie replied, much more time might have passed on Earth than on the ship. Their conversation would feel broken and uneven, like two people talking through a very slow, unreliable connection. This highlights how time dilation affects not only aging, but also relationships and communication. The twin paradox is also a story about perspective. Neither twin feels anything unusual about their own experience. Alex does not notice time slowing on the ship. Jamie does not notice time speeding up on Earth. Each believes their clock is correct. The paradox only becomes clear when they come back together and compare. This makes the situation dramatic and emotional. Imagine Alex stepping off the ship, expecting to see Jamie as they remember them, only to find decades have passed. The world would have changed, friends and family may be gone, and society might be completely different. For Alex, it would feel like jumping into the future. In science fiction, this idea appears in stories about space travelers returning home to find that centuries have passed. These tales capture the human side of relativity. The theory is not just about numbers and equations. It is about how motion and time shape lives. The twin paradox gives a simple, powerful way to understand this. Real-world technology cannot yet reach speeds close to light, but even small fractions of that speed show the effect. Astronauts on the International Space Station experience a very slight time difference compared to people on Earth because they move quickly in orbit. The difference is only fractions of a second, but it proves that time dilation is real. If spacecraft one day travel far faster, the effect will become much larger, just like in the story of Alex and Jamie. The twin paradox reminds us that time is not fixed. It depends on motion and perspective. For Jamie, the years pass as usual. For Alex, time flows differently. When they reunite, their watches and bodies reveal the strange truth. The universe allows two people to live at different speeds, even though they started together. Imagine two tiny particles created together in the same event, like twins born at the same moment. These particles are connected in a very special way. They are said to be entangled. When particles are entangled, their states are linked no matter how far apart they move. If you change one, the other changes instantly, even if it is on the other side of the universe. This connection happens faster than the speed of light, which should be impossible according to the rules of physics. Albert Einstein called this spooky action at a distance because it seemed strange and even unsettling. To understand why this is so puzzling, imagine you and a friend each have a pair of gloves. You put one glove from each pair in a box and then shuffle the boxes. You keep one box and send the other far away. When your friend opens their box, they instantly know which glove you have without looking. If they see a left glove, they know you have the right glove. This is not mysterious because the gloves were already decided before the boxes were separated. Quantum entanglement, however, is different. It is as if neither glove had a fixed type until one of you opened the box. The moment one person looks, the other glove instantly becomes the opposite, no matter the distance between you. This defies our everyday sense of cause and effect. In the quantum world, particles like electrons and photons do not have definite properties until they are measured. Before measurement, they exist in a state of superposition, meaning they hold many possible values at once. When two particles are entangled, their superpositions are linked. If one particle is measured and found to have a certain value, the other particle instantly chooses a matching value, even if it is light years away. The connection is so fast that no signal could have traveled between them in time. This seems to break the cosmic speed limit set by the speed of light. Einstein was deeply troubled by this idea. He believed that the universe should be local, meaning that objects can only be influenced by their immediate surroundings. If something happens far away, there should be a delay before it affects you, just like how it takes time for sunlight to reach Earth. Entanglement seemed to violate this principle. Einstein, along with colleagues Boris Podolsky and Nathan Rosen, proposed a famous thought experiment known as the EPR paradox. They argued that entanglement must involve hidden variables, unknown factors that determine the particle states in advance. In their view, the particles were like the gloves in the earlier example. The outcome was set at the beginning. Humans just didn't know it yet. Years later, physicist John Bell came up with a way to test whether hidden variables could explain entanglement. His work led to experiments that measured the correlations between entangled particles. The results showed that no hidden variables could fully explain the behavior. The particles acted as if they were truly connected in a way that went beyond classical physics. This confirmed the reality of entanglement and showed that the universe is non-local in some sense. It does not follow the rules of everyday cause and effect. Consider a practical example. Imagine two scientists, one on Earth and one on Mars. They each have one particle from an entangled pair. When the scientist on Earth measures their particle, they see a specific result, like a spin pointing up or down. At that exact moment, the scientist on Mars will see the opposite result when they measure their particle, no matter how far apart they are. The link is instantaneous. Even though no signal traveled between them, their results are perfectly correlated. This has been tested many times in laboratories, and the pattern always holds true. Entanglement is not just a theoretical puzzle. It has practical uses in modern technology. Quantum cryptography uses entangled particles to create secure communication systems. If someone tries to intercept the entangled link, the disturbance can be detected immediately. Quantum computers also rely on entanglement. Regular computers use bits that are either 0 or 1. Quantum computers use qubits, which can be both 0 and 1 at the same time through superposition. When qubits are entangled, they can perform complex calculations much faster than classical machines. The paradox lies in how we think about information. If the particles are truly influencing each other instantly, it seems like they are sending information faster than light. But according to quantum theory, no actual information travels between them in a way that can be used to send messages. The connection is real, but it cannot be controlled to transmit signals. It is like two dice that always land on matching numbers, even when rolled far apart. The pattern is visible, but you cannot use it to send a message. Imagine a magician performing a trick with two boxes. No matter where the boxes are placed, when you open one, the other instantly shows a matching symbol. It feels like magic, but it is not communication. It is simply a strange, built-in connection. Quantum entanglement works like this, except it is not a trick. It is a fundamental feature of the universe. The mystery deepens when you think about what this means for reality. If two particles can act as one system across vast distances, then space itself may not be as separate as it seems. The universe might be more interconnected than we realize. Some scientists even suggest that entanglement hints at a deeper level of reality where distance has no meaning. In this view, the particles are not truly separate objects. They are part of a single whole, and what happens to one is simply what happens to the entire system. Experiments continue to push the limits of entanglement. In one test, scientists sent entangled photons to satellites in orbit and found that the effect still worked. This shows that entanglement is not fragile. It can survive across great distances and under different conditions. The results have opened the door to new technologies like quantum networks, which could one day connect computers around the world using entangled particles. To grasp the scale of the paradox, imagine two people flipping coins in different countries. In normal life, the flips would be random and unconnected. But in an entangled world, every time one coin lands on heads, the other instantly lands on tails, perfectly and without fail. It does not matter how far apart they are. The connection is absolute. This goes against our common sense. It suggests that either the coins are secretly linked by some hidden mechanism, or reality itself works in a way we do not yet fully understand. Einstein never accepted the idea completely. He preferred to believe that something was missing from the theory, some hidden piece that would restore the rules of cause and effect. However, modern experiments have repeatedly confirmed the predictions of quantum mechanics. Entanglement is real, and it does not fit easily into our everyday understanding of the world. The quantum entanglement paradox shows us that the universe is stranger than it appears. It challenges the idea that events are separate and that information must travel step by step through space. Instead, it reveals a hidden unity where particles behave as parts of a single, connected system, no matter how far apart they are. Einstein's spooky action at a distance remains one of the most fascinating and mysterious features of modern physics. Imagine you are watching an archer take aim. The bow is drawn, the string is released, and the arrow flies through the air toward its target. From your perspective, the arrow moves smoothly and continuously. You can see it leave the bow, cross the field, and strike the target. The motion feels natural and obvious. Now pause the scene in your mind at a single instant. At that exact moment, the arrow is frozen in place. It occupies a specific position, no more and no less. In that snapshot, it is not moving. It is simply there. If you pause the next moment, you get another snapshot where the arrow is again perfectly still, just in a slightly different position. Zeno, an ancient Greek philosopher, used this idea to create a paradox about motion. He argued that if time is made up of separate moments, like frames in a film, then at every single moment, the arrow is motionless. If at no instant it is moving, how can adding all those still moments together create actual motion? It would be like stacking thousands of photographs and expecting them to come alive. According to this reasoning, motion itself should be impossible. Yet, we clearly see things moving all the time. Consider a simple example of a movie. A film reel is made up of many individual frames. Each frame is a still image. When projected quickly, the sequence of frames creates the illusion of movement. You know that the characters on the screen are not truly moving. It is your mind blending the images together. Zeno suggested that reality might work the same way. If the universe is just a series of frozen instants, then motion might be nothing more than an illusion our senses create. To explore this further, imagine looking at a clock. At 12 hours, the arrow is at one point in space. At 12:01, it is at a different point. At 12:02, it has moved farther along. If we only consider these exact moments, we never actually see the arrow in motion. We just see it in one place and then in another. Motion seems to disappear when you focus too closely, like trying to see a picture by staring at a single dot on the screen. This leads to a puzzle. We experience motion as continuous and smooth. Yet if we break it down into individual moments, there is no movement at any single point in time. It is like trying to understand a flowing river by looking at one drop of water. The drop is still, yet somehow millions of drops together create a moving current. Zeno's paradox challenges us to explain how something made up entirely of motionless pieces can produce motion. Think about a flipbook. Each page has a slightly different drawing. When you flip through the pages quickly, the drawings seem to move. The faster you flip, the smoother the movement appears. If you stop on one page, the picture is static. Nothing moves. The paradox asks whether reality works like a flipbook. If so, what flips the pages? What connects each still moment to the next to create the flow of time and movement? Modern science offers ways to address this problem. In physics, motion is not defined as an object physically shifting during a single instant. Instead, motion is described as a change in position over time. The key is not what happens at one exact moment, but how positions relate across many moments. The arrow does not need to be moving within a single frozen frame for motion to be real. Motion exists in the relationship between frames, not inside each frame itself. Calculus, a branch of mathematics developed long after Zeno, provides tools to deal with these ideas. Calculus shows how continuous motion can emerge from infinitely many tiny changes. Even if time can be divided into smaller and smaller parts, the total can still add up to a smooth whole. Imagine slicing a line into countless points. Each point is separate and has no length. Yet together, they form a line with measurable length. In the same way, countless still instants can add up to continuous motion. To make this more concrete, imagine a car driving down a straight road. At 12 o'clock, it is at the 1 mile mark. At 12:01, it is at the 2 mile mark. Even if at every exact instant the car is at a specific point, the distance it travels over time is real. We measure its speed as distance divided by time. The car does not need to move within a frozen moment. The movement exists in the change from one moment to the next. The paradox also raises questions about how we perceive time. Our brains process information in steps, much like a camera taking frames. We never actually see motion itself. Instead, we see a series of positions and interpret them as movement. This is why a flipbook or a movie feels real. The brain fills in the gaps automatically. It is possible that reality works in a similar way, and our minds turn a series of still events into the experience of flowing motion. Zeno's paradox becomes even more interesting when you think about modern technology. High-speed cameras can capture thousands of frames per second. When you watch a video of a bullet in flight slowed down, you see the bullet frozen in one spot, then in another, then in another. At each frame, there is no motion. The motion appears only when you play the frames back in sequence. This shows how the paradox still applies today. It forces us to ask whether the flow of time is continuous or whether it might be made up of countless tiny slices. Too small for us to notice. Some theories in physics suggest that time itself might be quantized, meaning it comes in indivisible units. If true, this would mean there is a smallest possible moment, like the smallest frame in a universal movie reel. Even then, motion would not happen inside a single moment. It would emerge from the sequence of moments, just as motion emerges from frames in a film. This idea does not fully solve the paradox, but it offers a new way to think about it. Imagine watching an arrow fly through the air while taking photos with a very fast camera. Each photo shows the arrow perfectly still, caught in mid-flight. If you take 1,000,000 photos, you have 1,000,000 still images, none of which show motion. Yet, when you flip through them in order, the arrow appears to move. The paradox challenges you to explain where the motion comes from. Is it in the arrow, the photos, or your mind? The answer depends on how you define movement and time. Zeno created the paradox to show the limits of human understanding. In his view, our senses tell us one story, while careful reasoning tells another. We see the arrow fly, but when we analyze the situation step by step, we run into contradictions. This tension between experience and logic has inspired thinkers for centuries. By questioning something as simple as an arrow in flight, Zeno revealed how complex and mysterious the concept of motion really is. The paradox of the arrow continues to be relevant because it touches on fundamental questions. What is time? What is motion? Are they continuous, or do they come in discrete pieces? When we watch an arrow soar through the air, we see a smooth path. But when we look closer, breaking time into smaller and smaller parts, we are left with stillness at every step. The puzzle lies in bridging these two views, in understanding how countless frozen instants can come together to create the world of motion we see and feel every day. Imagine standing at the edge of a calm pond. You throw a stone into the water, and ripples spread out in perfect circles. These ripples behave like waves, moving smoothly and spreading through space. Now, imagine tossing a handful of small pebbles into the pond. Each pebble creates its own set of ripples, and where the ripples overlap, they interact. Some waves grow stronger when they meet, while others cancel each other out. This pattern of interaction is called interference, and it is a signature behavior of waves. For a long time, scientists thought light worked exactly like those ripples. Experiments showed that light bends when it passes through a narrow opening, and that it can create interference patterns just like water waves. In the early 1800s, an experiment by Thomas Young demonstrated this clearly. He shined light through two tiny slits onto a screen. Instead of forming two bright spots, the light created a series of bright and dark bands. The bands showed that light waves were interfering with each other, growing stronger in some places and canceling out in others. This seemed to prove that light was a wave, spreading out and interacting in predictable ways. But as scientists studied light more closely, they found something surprising. In some experiments, light behaved not like a wave, but like a stream of tiny particles. When light hits certain materials, it knocks out individual electrons in a precise way. This effect, called the photoelectric effect, cannot be explained by waves alone. Albert Einstein studied this phenomenon and proposed that light comes in small packets of energy called photons. These photons behave like particles, each carrying a fixed amount of energy. The photoelectric effect was so important that it helped establish the field of quantum physics and earned Einstein a Nobel Prize. This created a strange problem. Light seemed to be two things at once. In some situations, it acted like a wave. In others, it acted like a particle. Scientists called this wave-particle duality. The same beam of light could spread out and interfere like ripples on a pond, but it could also strike a surface as individual precise impacts, like tiny stones. At first, this seemed like a contradiction. How could light be both a wave and a particle? The mystery deepened when scientists studied electrons. Electrons were thought to be particles, tiny solid bits of matter like miniature billiard balls. But when researchers sent electrons through a double-slit experiment, expecting them to behave like particles, they saw an interference pattern instead. This meant that electrons, like light, also had wave-like behavior. Even solid matter appeared to have this dual nature. It was as if the entire universe was built on something that was neither fully a wave nor fully a particle. The double-slit experiment is especially revealing. Imagine firing photons or electrons one at a time at a barrier with two slits. If they were just particles, you would expect them to form two piles on the screen behind the slits, like sand passing through two narrow openings. Instead, when many are sent through, an interference pattern appears. Each particle seems to interfere with itself, as if it traveled through both slits at once. This makes no sense if you think of the particles as tiny solid objects. The pattern suggests that before being measured, each particle exists in a state of possibilities, like a wave spread out across space. Here's where the puzzle grows even stranger. If you place a detector to observe which slit the particle actually goes through, the interference pattern disappears. The particles behave like ordinary particles again, forming two piles instead of an interference pattern. The very act of observation changes the outcome. This implies that reality does not have a fixed form until it is measured. Before observation, the particle is in a superposition of states, like a wave that has not decided where to land. Once observed, it collapses into one definite position. This raises deep questions about the nature of reality. Does the particle know it is being watched? Does the universe behave differently when measured? Some scientists interpret this as meaning that observation plays a fundamental role in shaping reality. Others argue that the measurement simply interacts with the particle, forcing it into a definite state. Either way, the result is clear. Light and matter behave differently depending on whether they are being observed. To make this idea more concrete, imagine a hallway with two doors. You throw tennis balls toward the doors. If the balls are like classical particles, each ball goes through one door or the other. After many throws, you will find two distinct piles behind the doors. Now, imagine replacing the tennis balls with something stranger. When you do not watch, the objects seem to pass through both doors at the same time, spreading out like mist and interfering with themselves. When you check to see which door they choose, they instantly stop behaving like mist and behave like normal balls again. This strange switch lies at the heart of wave-particle duality. Wave-particle duality is not just a curious experiment. It is the foundation of modern technology. The behavior of photons is essential for devices like lasers and solar panels. The wave-like nature of electrons is used in electron microscopes, which can see objects far too small for ordinary light microscopes. Quantum mechanics, which grew out of these discoveries, has led to inventions like semiconductors, computers, and medical imaging devices. The strange dual nature of light and matter is woven into everyday life, even if we do not notice it. The paradox also affects how we think about ourselves and the universe. In the classical view, reality is made up of solid objects moving through space in predictable ways. In the quantum view, reality is more like a shifting field of probabilities. A particle has many possible positions and behaviors until observation collapses it into one outcome. This suggests that certainty and solidity are illusions created by measurement. The underlying world is flexible and uncertain, like a ripple that has not yet formed a wave. Some interpretations go even further. The many worlds theory, for example, suggests that all possible outcomes happen, but in separate, branching universes. In one universe, the particle goes through the left slit. In another, it goes through the right. When you measure it, you only see one outcome, but the others still exist in parallel. This removes the need for a collapse, but creates a picture of reality far stranger than everyday experience. Wave-particle duality challenges our deepest assumptions about what things are. We are used to clear categories. The wave is one kind of thing, a particle another. Light refuses to fit neatly into either box. It acts like a wave when spreading out and interfering, and like a particle when striking a detector or solar cell. It is not that light switches between being a wave and a particle. It is both at once, depending on how you look at it. Imagine a person who is both a musician and a painter. When they are in a concert hall, they play music. When they are in an art studio, they paint. Their identity does not change, but the role they express depends on the situation. Light works in a similar way. It has one fundamental nature, but different experiments reveal different aspects of it. This idea helps make sense of the paradox without fully solving it. Wave-particle duality shows that reality is not always as straightforward as it appears. The same beam of light can be both a spreading wave and a stream of discrete particles. Electrons, which seem solid and definite, can spread out and interfere like ripples on water. Our observations shape what we see, and what we see may be only one part of a much deeper and stranger whole. Through this paradox, science reminds us that the universe is richer and more mysterious than our everyday senses can grasp. On a summer day in 1950, the physicist Enrico Fermi was having lunch with colleagues when the topic of aliens came up. They were discussing the growing number of reports about flying saucers and space travel. Fermi, known for his sharp and simple questions, suddenly asked, "Where is everybody?" His question was so direct that it stunned the group. The universe is vast. There are billions of stars in our galaxy alone, many of them older than the sun. Many of those stars likely have planets. If even a small fraction of those planets can support life, there should be countless alien civilizations out there. Some of them could be millions of years more advanced than us. With so much time and so many opportunities, it seems logical that at least one civilization should have reached out to us or even visited Earth by now. Yet there is nothing but silence. This contradiction is known as the Fermi Paradox. To understand why it is puzzling, imagine standing on a crowded beach. You expect to see people walking, talking, and leaving footprints in the sand. If you saw no one and no signs of activity, you would think the beach was empty. The universe is like that beach on a massive scale. The stars are the grains of sand. Given the numbers, we expect to see clear signs of life. Instead, space seems quiet and empty. Telescopes scan the skies, and space probes travel to nearby planets. But so far, we have found no evidence of other civilizations. One possible answer is that life itself is very rare. Maybe Earth is an exception rather than the rule. The process that led to life here might require an unlikely combination of events. For instance, the right kind of star, the right kind of planet, the right distance from that star, and the right chemical ingredients must all line up perfectly. If even one step is incredibly rare, then intelligent life could be almost non-existent. In this view, the silence is not surprising because there is no one else to speak to us. But life appeared on Earth fairly quickly after the planet formed. This suggests that the first steps toward life might not be so rare. If simple life is common, perhaps the bottleneck comes later. Complex, intelligent life could be much harder to evolve. It took billions of years for single-celled organisms on Earth to develop into multicellular creatures, and even longer for intelligence to appear. There may be countless planets covered in simple life like bacteria, but very few with creatures capable of building technology or communicating across space. Another idea is that civilizations often destroy themselves before they can spread. As species become advanced, they gain powerful technologies that can both help and harm them. War, environmental collapse, or uncontrolled experiments might wipe them out. If this happens often, then civilizations might burn out quickly, like sparks in the dark. When we look at the universe, we see the brief glow of their rise and fall, but never catch them while they are still thriving. This idea carries a warning for us. If self-destruction is common, it might be a danger our own species will face as we grow more powerful. Some thinkers suggest that advanced civilizations might be out there but choose to stay hidden. This is sometimes called the zoo hypothesis. In this scenario, aliens are aware of us, but they do not interfere. Just as humans observe animals in a reserve without disturbing them, advanced beings might be quietly watching us. They could be waiting for us to reach a certain level of maturity before making contact. If this is true, the silence we experience is like being inside a carefully managed enclosure. We are unaware of the watchers beyond the fence. There is also the possibility that we are not looking in the right way. Our search for extraterrestrial signals focuses mostly on radio waves and visible light. Alien civilizations might communicate using methods we do not yet understand, like quantum entanglement or forms of energy we have not discovered. It is possible that signals are all around us, but we lack the tools or knowledge to detect them. This would be like ancient people standing under a telegraph wire, unable to recognize the faint hum of messages passing overhead. Distance is another factor. Even if advanced civilizations exist, space is vast. The nearest star system is over 4 light-years away. A galaxy is 100,000 light-years across. If a civilization is sending signals, those signals must travel for centuries or even millennia before reaching us. Our own radio broadcasts have been traveling through space for only about 100 years. That is a tiny bubble compared to the size of the galaxy. We may simply need to wait longer before we encounter anything. Another scenario is that alien civilizations are so advanced that their activities are beyond our comprehension. Consider how ants view humans. An ant might notice a towering building but not understand what it is or why it exists. In the same way, we might be surrounded by alien technology but unable to recognize it. A Dyson sphere, a structure built around a star to capture its energy, might look to us like a natural phenomenon because we lack the context to see it as artificial. There is also the unsettling idea that we are the first. Perhaps no other civilization has reached our level yet. If that is the case, the universe is not silent because it is empty, but because we are at the leading edge of life's expansion. We could be the pioneers, the first to explore and communicate. This idea is both exciting and lonely. It would mean that our actions matter on a cosmic scale, because there is no one else to guide or challenge us. The Fermi Paradox even touches on simulation theory. Some people suggest that we might be living inside a simulation created by a higher intelligence. In this case, the absence of aliens could be a feature of the simulation, like a video game where only certain areas are populated. If the creators of the simulation wanted us to focus on our own development, they might have programmed the universe to appear empty beyond a certain point. To imagine the scale of the problem, think about the Drake equation, which estimates the number of advanced civilizations in our galaxy. The equation includes factors like the rate of star formation, the number of planets per star, and the probability of life developing. When scientists plug in reasonable values, the numbers suggest that there should be many civilizations. Yet when we look up, we see nothing. This mismatch between expectation and observation is the heart of the paradox. Picture a vast forest filled with countless trees. If you walk quietly through it, you'd expect to hear birds calling and animals moving. If you hear nothing at all, you start to wonder why. Are the animals hiding? Have they vanished? Or are you the only creature there? The night sky is like that silent forest. We peer into its depths, waiting for a sign of life. So far, the only voice we hear is our own. The Fermi Paradox forces us to confront our place in the cosmos. It suggests that either life is far rarer than we think, or there are reasons we cannot yet see that explain the silence. Whether the answer is loneliness, danger, or mystery, the question itself pushes us to explore further. Fermi's simple question, asked over lunch decades ago, still echoes today whenever we look up at the stars and wonder why no one has answered back. Imagine a star collapsing under its own weight, shrinking smaller and smaller until it becomes a black hole. A black hole has gravity so strong that nothing can escape, not even light. At its center is a point called a singularity, where matter is crushed into infinite density. Surrounding it is the event horizon, the boundary beyond which nothing can return. If something crosses this boundary, it is gone forever, at least from the outside observer's point of view. This is what makes black holes mysterious and fascinating. Now think about information. In physics, information means the details about the state of a system, the positions of particles, their speeds, their properties. A basic rule of the universe is that information cannot be destroyed. It can change form, like when a book burns and turns into ash and smoke, but in theory, you could still track where every atom went and reconstruct the story. Even if it is practically impossible, the information is preserved. This rule is fundamental to the laws of physics, especially quantum mechanics. Here's where the paradox begins. When matter falls into a black hole, all the information about it appears to vanish. Imagine throwing a computer, a tree, or even an entire planet into a black hole. From outside, all you see is the black hole getting slightly bigger. It doesn't seem to matter whether you threw in a diamond or a pile of dust. The details about what went in are erased. It is as if you burned a book and then lost track of the smoke, leaving no way to ever recover the words. This suggests that information is truly destroyed, but that cannot happen according to quantum mechanics. The two ideas clash. General relativity, which describes gravity and black holes, says the information disappears. Quantum mechanics says it cannot. This is the black hole information paradox. To see the problem more clearly, picture a locked safe. You toss the safe into a river. You no longer have access to what's inside, but you know the papers are still there. Now imagine instead that the safe is thrown into a black hole. In this case, it seems like the contents do not just become hidden, they cease to exist. From the outside, it is as if the papers were erased from reality. This breaks the fundamental rule of physics, creating a deep puzzle. In the 1970s, Stephen Hawking made this problem even more complex when he discovered that black holes are not completely black. According to his calculations, black holes slowly leak energy through a process now called Hawking radiation. This happens because of quantum effects near the event horizon. Tiny pairs of particles pop into existence for brief moments, one falling into the black hole while the other escapes. Over time, this causes the black hole to shrink and eventually evaporate completely. Here's the problem. Hawking radiation seems completely random. It carries no information about what fell into the black hole. If a black hole disappears entirely through evaporation, the information about everything it consumed is lost forever. Imagine burning not just a book, but also the ashes, the smoke, and every trace of it, leaving nothing behind. This would violate quantum mechanics at the most fundamental level. Physicists have spent decades trying to resolve this paradox. One possibility is that the information does come out with the Hawking radiation, but in a form so subtle that we cannot detect it. Instead of being truly random, the radiation might contain faint patterns that encode the lost details. Think of it like an encrypted message. At first glance, it looks like nonsense, but hidden within it is meaningful data. If this is correct, then the information is never destroyed. It just takes a form we do not yet understand. Another idea focuses on the event horizon itself. Some researchers suggest that the information is stored on the surface of the horizon, like data on a hologram. This concept is known as the holographic principle. It proposes that everything inside a black hole could be described by information written on its boundary. In this view, when matter falls in, the details are smeared across the horizon. As the black hole evaporates, those details are slowly released. This preserves the rule that information cannot be lost, though it forces us to rethink what inside and outside really mean. A more dramatic proposal is the idea of a firewall. In this scenario, there is a violent wall of energy at the event horizon that destroys anything falling in. The information is not lost, but instead is burned and released right at the edge. This idea is controversial because it clashes with general relativity, which predicts that crossing the horizon should feel smooth and uneventful for the object falling in. A firewall would change that picture completely, turning the boundary into a place of chaos rather than calm. Consider a simpler analogy. Imagine you are shredding documents. General relativity says that once the documents go into the shredder, they are gone. Quantum mechanics says the pieces must still exist somewhere and, in principle, could be put back together. The paradox is like discovering that the shredder not only tears up the paper, but also makes the pieces vanish into thin air. The debate among physicists is about where those pieces go and whether they can ever be recovered. Recent work has provided some hope. Calculations using quantum gravity and string theory suggest that information may indeed leak out slowly through Hawking radiation in a very complex way. This would mean that black holes act like giant, extremely messy computers. They scramble the information almost beyond recognition, but never completely destroy it. Imagine pouring different colored paints into a blender. The colors mix until you cannot tell them apart. But in principle, if you knew the exact motions of every molecule, you could reverse the process and separate them again. The black hole might work like that blender, turning clear information into a chaotic swirl. To test these ideas, scientists study smaller systems that mimic black holes in the lab. These experiments use things like sound waves or ultra-cold atoms to create similar conditions. By observing how these systems behave, researchers hope to gain insight into what happens at a real event horizon. Though these experiments cannot fully replicate a black hole, they provide clues about how information might be preserved. The paradox also connects to deeper questions about the universe. If information can truly be destroyed, then the laws of physics would need to be rewritten. Predictions would become unreliable, and cause and effect would break down. On the other hand, if information is always preserved, even in the extreme environment of a black hole, it would reinforce the idea that the universe is fundamentally ordered and predictable, even when it appears chaotic. Imagine throwing a library's worth of books into a black hole. From the outside, you see nothing but a dark sphere slowly shrinking as it emits radiation. The stories in those books seem to vanish completely, The information paradox asks whether those stories are truly gone or whether they are still present in some hidden form. Solving this puzzle is not just about black holes. It is about whether the universe itself obeys rules that can never be broken. This is why the paradox remains one of the most important and challenging problems in modern physics. Imagine trying to track a small bird flying through the sky. You want to know exactly where it is and how fast it's moving. You take a snapshot with a camera to capture its position. In that instant, you get a clear picture of where the bird is, but because the photo freezes time, it tells you nothing about its speed. If you switch to a video, you can watch the bird's motion and estimate its speed, but the exact position at any single moment becomes less clear. This trade-off is similar to what happens in the quantum world, except at a much deeper level. In everyday life, we assume that with precise enough tools, we could measure both position and velocity at the same time. If you track a car on the highway, you can note its location and its speed with high accuracy. But in the realm of very small particles, like electrons or photons, this assumption breaks down. Werner Heisenberg, a physicist working in the early 20th century, discovered a fundamental limit to how much we can know about a particle's position and velocity at once. This idea became known as the uncertainty principle. The principle states that the more precisely you know a particle's position, the less precisely you can know its velocity, and vice versa. It is not just a matter of imperfect tools or human error. The limit comes from the very nature of reality at the quantum scale. Particles are not like tiny billiard balls moving through space in a fixed path. They exist as clouds of probability, described by mathematical functions that show where they are likely to be and how they are likely to move. Think of a flashlight beam shining in a dark room. The light spreads out, and you cannot say where a single photon is until it hits a surface. Similarly, an electron is spread out like a wave until you measure it. When you measure the position, you collapse the wave, forcing the electron to choose a spot. The act of measuring changes the system. This is not a flaw in our observation. It is a fundamental property of how quantum particles behave. To understand why this happens, imagine trying to see an electron using light. To detect it, you must shine photons onto it. If you use a low-energy photon, you might not disturb the electron much, but your measurement will be blurry, giving you poor information about its position. If you use a high-energy photon to get a sharper image, the photon strikes the electron with greater force, knocking it off course and changing its velocity. The very act of looking alters what you are looking at. It's like trying to measure the exact location of a soap bubble by poking it with a stick. The more force you use to pinpoint it, the more you risk popping it or moving it. This principle has profound effects on how we think about particles. In classical physics, you can describe a system completely by knowing the positions and velocities of all its parts. With that information, you can predict the future perfectly. This is how Newtonian mechanics works. But in quantum mechanics, that perfect knowledge is impossible. You can either know where something is or how it is moving, but never both with unlimited accuracy. This introduces a fundamental uncertainty into the fabric of the universe. Imagine a tiny box with an electron inside. If the box is small, you can know the electron's position very well because it must be somewhere within the box. But because its position is so well defined, its velocity becomes highly uncertain. The electron might be moving wildly, bouncing around at unpredictable speeds. If you make the box larger, the position becomes less certain, but you can get a better idea of the velocity. This trade-off is a direct consequence of the uncertainty principle. The principle is often misunderstood. It does not mean that reality is fuzzy or that particles are somehow confused. Instead, it reflects the limits of what can be known. The uncertainty is built into the equations that describe the quantum world. It is not about human mistakes, but about the way nature itself operates. Even with perfect instruments, you cannot bypass this limit. Consider how this plays out in technology. The behavior of electrons in atoms depends on the uncertainty principle. Electrons do not orbit the nucleus like planets around a star. Instead, they exist in regions called orbitals, which are areas where the electron is most likely to be found. These shapes are a direct result of the uncertainty between position and velocity. Without this principle, atoms as we know them would not exist. Matter would collapse because the electrons could be packed into the nucleus without resistance. The very stability of the world depends on this fundamental uncertainty. The principle also explains why certain measurements in quantum experiments seem strange. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles like electrons create an interference pattern when not observed, behaving like waves spread across space. But when you measure which slit they go through, the interference pattern disappears, and they act like particles. The measurement changes the outcome because it forces the system to take on a specific state. This ties directly to the idea that observing position disrupts information about motion. Think about rolling dice. Before you look, each die is in a state of uncertainty. It could be showing any number. The moment you look, you fix the outcome. In the quantum world, it's not just that you don't know the number yet. The number does not exist until the observation happens. Similarly, the exact position or velocity of a particle is not fixed until measurement forces it into one reality. Heisenberg's discovery had far-reaching consequences. It showed that determinism, the idea that the future can be predicted perfectly if you know the present, does not apply at the smallest scales. Instead, the universe operates on probabilities. You can predict the likelihood of a particle being in a certain place or moving a certain way, but you cannot predict both with absolute certainty. This introduces a layer of randomness into nature, though it is a very precise and predictable kind of randomness, governed by strict mathematical rules. One way to visualize this is to imagine a spotlight moving across a stage. If the beam is narrow, you can see exactly where it shines. You lose sight of what's happening outside the beam. If the beam is wide, you can see the overall motion but lose the fine details of position. In quantum mechanics, focusing on position narrows your view of velocity, and focusing on velocity blurs your view of position. You cannot sharpen both images at the same time. This principle also has practical limits in everyday devices. In electronics, the behavior of tiny components, like transistors, is influenced by uncertainty. Quantum tunneling, a phenomenon where particles pass through barriers they shouldn't be able to cross, arises from the same rules. As computer chips become smaller, engineers must design around these effects. Quantum mechanics is not just a theory, it shapes the technology we use every day. Even larger systems can reveal traces of uncertainty. For instance, scientists use the principle to explain why stars do not collapse under their own gravity. The particles inside a star have a limit to how precisely their positions can be tacked together. This creates a pressure that resists collapse, called degeneracy pressure. Without this effect, white dwarf stars and neutron stars would not exist in their current forms. The uncertainty principle shows us that the act of measuring is not neutral. In the quantum world, measurement is an active process that changes what is being measured. It reminds us that reality at its smallest scale is dynamic and interconnected. When you try to pin down one detail, another slips away, not because of human error, but because this is how nature works. By accepting this limit, we gain a deeper understanding of the strange but consistent rules that govern the universe. Imagine you are standing on a quiet train platform. A long train rushes past at nearly the speed of light. As it passes, two flashes of lightning strike the tracks, one at the front of the train and one at the back. From where you stand, you see both flashes at the same time. You conclude that the lightning bolt struck simultaneously. Now picture someone riding inside the middle of the train. From their point of view, things look very different. Because the train is moving forward, the light from the flash at the front of the train has to travel a bit farther to reach them, while the light from the flash at the back has a shorter distance to travel. To the person on the train, the back flash arrives first. They conclude that the lightning at the back struck before the one at the front. Both observers are correct, even though they disagree about the order of events. This is the relativity of simultaneity. It shows that whether two events happen at the same time depends on where you are and how you are moving. There is no universal now that everyone shares. Time is not absolute. Instead, it is connected to motion and perspective, just like space. In everyday life, this effect is invisible because the speeds we experience are so small compared to the speed of light. If a car drives by while you stand on the sidewalk, you and the driver will agree on what events are simultaneous. The difference is so tiny that no human could detect it. But at extreme speeds, the difference becomes clear and dramatic. The train and lightning thought experiment is a way to make this idea easier to imagine. Consider a second example. Imagine two synchronized clocks at opposite ends of a large room. To you, standing still in the center, the clocks stay perfectly matched. If they both strike noon at the same moment, you hear the chimes together. Now imagine walking quickly across the room. As you move, you see one clock slightly ahead of the other. This happens not because the clocks are broken, but because your motion changes the timing of the signals you receive. In the same way, motion changes how you experience events in space and time. This effect is a direct result of Einstein's theory of special relativity. The theory states that the speed of light is constant for all observers, no matter how fast they are moving. Light does not behave like ordinary objects. If you throw a ball from a moving train, someone standing on the ground sees the ball's speed as the speed of the throw plus the speed of the train. Light does not work that way. Its speed stays the same for everyone, which means time and space must adjust to keep the laws of physics consistent. When you think of time as a single universal flow, like a giant clock ticking the same for everyone, it seems natural to believe in a shared now. The relativity of simultaneity shows why this picture is wrong. Time is woven together with space into a single structure called space-time. Events that appear simultaneous to you may happen in different orders to someone else moving differently. Your now is not the same as theirs. To see how strange this can be, imagine two astronauts far apart in space. Each has a light signal they plan to send at exactly the same moment, according to their own clocks. A third observer floating between them receives the signals and tries to determine whether they were sent at the same time. Depending on how the observer moves, they might conclude that the first astronaut sent the signal first, or the second did, or that both were simultaneous. There is no single answer that works for everyone. Time depends on perspective. This idea has practical consequences. Global Positioning System satellites orbit Earth at high speeds. Their clocks run slightly differently than clocks on the ground because of both time dilation and the relativity of simultaneity. Engineers must correct for these effects so that GPS devices can calculate positions accurately. Without these adjustments, navigation systems would quickly drift out of sync and give false readings. The fact that our phones can guide us to a restaurant shows that relativity is not just theory, it is part of our daily lives. The lack of a universal now also changes how we think about cause and effect. In classical physics, the sequence of events is fixed. If one event causes another, everyone agrees on the order. In relativity, events that are far enough apart in space can have their order switched depending on who is observing. This does not mean causality breaks down, because two events that are directly connected, like flipping a switch and turning on a light, cannot have their order reversed. But for events that are too far apart to influence each other, the sequence is not absolute. Picture two fireworks exploding in different cities at the same moment, according to someone standing on Earth. An alien traveling in a spaceship near the speed of light might see one explosion happen before the other. Neither perspective is wrong. The order depends on motion, and there is no privileged frame of reference that decides the truth for everyone. This is difficult to grasp because our everyday experience teaches us that time is uniform and shared. Relativity reveals that this is an illusion created by living at slow speeds and small scales. To help visualize this, imagine space-time as a loaf of bread. Each slice represents a moment in time, and each point on the slice represents a place in space. For someone standing still, the slices stack neatly, one on top of another. But for someone moving at high speed, the slices tilt. Their view of which events belong to the same slice or the same moment of time shifts. This is why two observers moving differently cannot agree on what is happening now. They are cutting the loaf at different angles. This concept also appears in stories about space travel. Imagine a ship leaving Earth for a distant planet. The crew experiences events in one order, while people on Earth see them in another. Messages sent between them arrive out of sequence. What seems like a single continuous timeline from one perspective becomes tangled when seen from another. This makes communication challenging and highlights how deeply motion affects the flow of time. The relativity of simultaneity plays a role in the famous twin paradox as well. When one twin travels near the speed of light and then returns, they are younger than the twin who stayed on Earth. Part of this difference comes from the fact that during the journey, the traveling twin's sense of now shifted compared to the twin at home. Their timelines diverged because their slices through space-time were tilted at different angles. Even though this idea feels abstract, you can think of it in simpler terms. Imagine two friends watching a parade from different spots along the route. One friend sees the marching band and the dancers at the same time. The other sees the band first and the dancers later. Both descriptions are correct because their positions are different. Relativity extends this everyday idea to include motion and light speed. Time itself becomes like the parade, and different observers see its parts in different orders. The relativity of simultaneity forces us to rethink what we mean by the present. It suggests that now is not a universal slice of time shared by everyone, but a local experience shaped by motion. Two people can disagree about whether events are happening at the same moment, and both can be correct. This challenges our intuition, but fits perfectly with the rules of special relativity. It shows that time, like space, is flexible and relative, woven into a complex structure that depends on where you are and how you move. Imagine a sealed box divided into two equal chambers with a tiny door in the middle. In one chamber, there is a collection of fast-moving gas molecules, and in the other, a collection of slow-moving ones. Normally, according to the second law of thermodynamics, the molecules would mix over time, spreading evenly throughout the box. Heat would flow from the hot side, where the molecules move faster, to the cold side, where they move slower. This process is natural and irreversible. Once the molecules are mixed, they will not separate themselves again. This law explains why ice melts in warm water and why coffee cools when left on the counter. It states that the total disorder or entropy of a closed system always increases. Now imagine a tiny creature, so small it can see and control individual molecules, sitting at the little door between the chambers. This creature, which James Clerk Maxwell called a demon, watches the molecules carefully. Whenever a fast molecule comes from the cold side toward the door, the demon opens it to let the molecule through. When a slow molecule comes from the hot side, the demon opens the door for it as well, moving it in the opposite direction. Over time, the demon's careful sorting causes all the fast molecules to gather on one side and all the slow molecules on the other. The result is that one chamber becomes hotter and the other cooler. This seems to violate the second law of thermodynamics. The demon has created order out of chaos without doing any work. It has lowered entropy by using only information and timing. If such a process were possible, it could lead to a perpetual motion machine, a device that runs forever without energy input. This would overturn one of the most fundamental principles of physics. Maxwell introduced this thought experiment in the 19th century to explore the limits of the second law and to challenge scientists to think more deeply about how entropy works. To picture the paradox, imagine a box filled with marbles of two colors, red and blue. If you shake the box, the marbles mix randomly. Without outside help, they will not separate into red on one side and blue on the other. The demon is like a careful sorter who opens a gate only when the right marble comes near, slowly organizing them by color. It seems magical because it goes against our normal experience of how systems behave. At first glance, the demon's actions look effortless. It does not seem to add energy to the system. It just opens and closes the door at the right moments. This is what makes the paradox so troubling. If the demon can separate the molecules without doing work, where does the extra order come from? Scientists began to examine the problem more closely, looking not only at the gas molecules, but also at the demon itself. They realized that while the demon may not use physical force to move the molecules, it must use energy to observe them and make decisions. Consider what the demon has to do. It must constantly watch every molecule, determine its speed, and decide whether to open the door. This requires storing and processing information. In modern terms, the demon is like a computer. A computer does not just passively watch data. It uses energy to store and erase information. In the 20th century, physicist Rolf Landauer showed that erasing information produces heat. This heat must go somewhere and it increases the entropy of the overall system. When you include the demon's own actions in the calculation, the total entropy still increases. The second law is safe. Imagine a security guard sorting people at a busy gate. The guard must pay attention, think about each person's direction, and act at exactly the right moment. Even if the guard does not physically push anyone, they still expend effort to make decisions. The demon faces the same challenge. Its ability to sort molecules is not free. The act of gathering and processing information has a physical cost. This realization transforms the paradox. The demon does not actually violate the second law. It shifts the problem to another part of the system. The gas in the box becomes more ordered, but the demon's memory and processes become more disordered. The entropy increase in the demon's mind balances out the entropy decrease in the gas. The total remains the same or grows, just as the second law predicts. The thought experiment also highlights the deep connection between physics and information. It shows that information is not an abstract idea. It has real physical effects. When you measure, record, or erase information, you are affecting the physical world. This insight has shaped modern fields like thermodynamics of computation and quantum information theory. To see this connection in everyday life, think about cleaning a messy room. As you organize the space, you reduce disorder in the room, but you also use up energy from your body. You sweat, breathe harder, and burn calories. The total entropy of the room and your body combined still increases. The demon's job is like cleaning the room at the molecular level. The molecules become neatly arranged, but the demon sweats in the form of heat and disorder in its memory. Modern experiments have tested related ideas. Scientists have built tiny devices that mimic the demon's behavior using particles and feedback systems. These experiments show that you can locally decrease entropy by using information, but only if you pay the cost somewhere else. The results confirm that the second law still holds, even in these extreme cases. The demon's story also has practical applications. It helps scientists design more efficient computers and engines. By understanding the link between information and energy, engineers can find ways to reduce wasted heat in electronics or create better data storage methods. The paradox has inspired advances in nanotechnology, where researchers manipulate individual molecules, much like the demon in Maxwell's thought experiment. Consider a modern version of the box. Instead of a tiny creature, imagine a computer-controlled gate with sensors and algorithms. The sensors detect particle speeds, and the computer opens and closes the gate accordingly. The system works much like Maxwell's demon, but now we can measure the energy used by the sensors and processor. We can see exactly how the second law remains intact. The computer's energy consumption ensures that no free order is created. The paradox dissolves once we account for every part of the system. Maxwell never believed that a real demon could exist. His goal was to push scientists to think about the foundations of thermodynamics. By imagining an impossible creature, he revealed hidden assumptions in the theory. The paradox sparked debates that lasted for decades, driving progress in physics. It showed that even a purely mental experiment can lead to real discoveries. In this way, the demon became a symbol of scientific exploration. It represents the idea that challenging the rules, even in imagination, can uncover new truths. The second law of thermodynamics remains unbroken, but our understanding of it has deepened. The demon's actions may be impossible, yet they force us to see the universe in a new light. In thinking about how a tiny gatekeeper might sort molecules, scientists have learned profound lessons about energy, information, and the limits of what can be known. A person wakes up one morning and decides that today they will be happy. They plan their schedule carefully, filling it with activities they believe will bring joy. They eat their favorite breakfast, play upbeat music, and remind themselves to think positive thoughts. Yet, as the day goes on, they notice a strange thing happening. Instead of feeling happier, they feel tense. Every time they check in with themselves and ask, "Am I happy yet?" they sense a gap between how they want to feel and how they actually feel. The more they focus on closing that gap, the wider it seems to grow. By nightfall, they are frustrated and exhausted. Their day of happiness has left them feeling worse. This is the Hedonic Paradox, the idea that the direct pursuit of happiness can make happiness harder to reach. The paradox occurs because happiness is often a byproduct rather than a goal. When someone tries to grab it directly, they place pressure on themselves. This pressure can create anxiety and self-consciousness, which interfere with natural enjoyment. It is like trying to fall asleep by forcing yourself to sleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. Sleep comes when you let go of effort. Happiness works in a similar way. Consider a group of friends going on a weekend trip. One friend declares, "This is going to be the best trip ever. We have to make every moment perfect." At first, everyone is excited, but soon they feel the weight of those expectations. If a meal is late or the weather turns bad, tension rises. The desire to have a perfect experience turns small problems into big disappointments. By focusing so much on being happy, they make it difficult to relax and actually enjoy the trip. Another group of friends, without grand expectations, might have a better time even if they face the same setbacks. Your happiness grows naturally from shared moments rather than being forced. The Hedonic Paradox also shows up in personal goals. A person might decide that finding happiness is their main purpose in life. They read books about happiness, attend workshops, and track their moods carefully. Each step is aimed at improving their well-being, but constant self-monitoring makes them hyper-aware of every dip in their mood. A small moment of sadness feels like failure. Instead of lifting their spirits, Their efforts keep them trapped in a cycle of analysis and disappointment. Happiness slips further away, not because it is impossible, but because they are gripping it too tightly. There is a psychological mechanism behind this. When people focus directly on happiness, they tend to compare their current state to an ideal state. They think, I should be happier right now. This creates a gap between reality and expectation. The mind fixates on that gap, turning attention inward. The person becomes more aware of their unhappiness, which increases discomfort. It is like looking in a mirror while dancing. The more you watch yourself, the harder it becomes to move naturally. Joy fades because it depends on immersion in the moment, not constant evaluation. Another reason the paradox occurs is adaptation. Humans are good at getting used to changes in their environment. A new job, a new house, or even winning a prize can bring a burst of happiness, but over time, the excitement fades. This process, called hedonic adaptation, means that chasing happiness through external achievements often leads to disappointment. You reach the goal, enjoy it briefly, and then return to your usual emotional baseline. If happiness depends only on reaching the next milestone, you are stuck in a loop of temporary highs followed by letdowns. Imagine someone climbing a mountain. At each peak, they believe they will finally feel content. When they reach the top, they feel proud for a moment, but then they notice another, higher peak in the distance. Instead of resting and enjoying the view, they rush off again. This endless pursuit keeps them moving but never satisfied. The act of climbing is not the problem. It is the belief that lasting happiness waits at the next summit. The paradox does not mean happiness is unattainable. It suggests that happiness comes more easily when it is not the direct target. Activities that absorb attention and provide meaning tend to produce happiness as a side effect. Think of a child building a sandcastle at the beach. The child is not thinking, I must be happy right now. They are fully focused on the act of shaping the sand. When the tide eventually washes the castle away, they may feel a brief pang of loss, but the overall experience remains joyful. The happiness came from engagement, not from chasing a specific feeling. Consider another example. A musician practicing a piece of music. If the musician plays for the love of the sound and the challenge, they often experience flow, a state where time seems to disappear. In flow, there is no self-conscious thought about happiness. The focus is entirely on the activity. Ironically, this deep immersion tends to produce the very happiness that escapes people who seek it directly. The musician is happy, not because they demanded to be, but because they lost themselves in the music. Even relationships can reflect the hedonic paradox. Someone might date with the primary goal of finding happiness. They evaluate every interaction through that lens. If a conversation does not bring instant joy, they feel discouraged. This creates pressure on both them and their partner. In contrast, someone who enters a relationship with curiosity and care often finds that happiness grows naturally over time. By focusing on connection rather than on happiness itself, they create the conditions where joy can flourish. The paradox also helps explain why certain cultural habits affect well-being. In societies where happiness is treated as a duty or a personal achievement, people may feel burdened by the need to be happy. When happiness becomes a measure of success, failing to feel it brings guilt or shame. This adds another layer of stress, making genuine happiness even harder to reach. In cultures where happiness is seen as a shared experience or a byproduct of community life, people may feel less pressure. They focus on relationships and daily rhythms rather than on constant self-evaluation. One way to think about the paradox is to compare happiness to a shy animal. If you chase it loudly, it runs away. If you sit quietly and focus on something else, it may approach on its own. Happiness often appears when attention is directed outward, toward meaningful activities, relationships, or goals. When attention turns inward, demanding happiness to appear, it slips away. Imagine a person walking through a field at sunrise. If they focus on capturing the perfect photo of the moment, they might miss the actual experience. They worry about lighting, angles, and camera settings. By the time they are satisfied with the photo, the sun has risen and the moment has passed. Another person, walking without a camera, simply watches the sky. They notice the colors, the cool air, and the sounds around them. They may not think about happiness at all, yet they feel it deeply. The difference lies in focus, not in the external scene. The Hedonic Paradox is a reminder that happiness often hides behind effort. The more you demand it, the more elusive it becomes. By letting go of the constant search and engaging fully with life, happiness tends to emerge naturally. It is not a prize to be seized, but a companion that joins you when you stop looking over your shoulder and start walking forward with curiosity and presence.